Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have a full review of the Galaxy S25 Ultra. You have to start. This device is earning the title of being the iPhone of Android, and that I do not know if it is good or bad. We will get to know it little by little. But you know, it is said that it has very few changes from the last generation, and it is true. But despite everything, it does have some changes that I will tell you little by little. Let's start first with the launch price, which in Mexico in the most basic configuration is 32,900 pesos, that is. It is more expensive even than the most basic configuration of the iPhone 16 Pro Max. We are talking about 12 gigabytes of RAM with 256 gigabytes of storage, and from there it goes up. If you want more storage, you have to pay more. It must be said that in Mexico, as in many other countries, there is no 16 gigabytes of RAM version that is available in South Korea and in some other selected regions. So it's clear that it's a very expensive device, and therefore we can demand everything we want from it. So let's get picky in this review, and you also get picky in the comments. As a positive point obviously will be the distribution, because you can buy it both in physical stores and online. In fact, in the Samsung store, there were good promotions. If at the time of recording this video I have an additional coupon for you, I will place it in the description in case. I'll leave you the link to go to the official Samsung store, but you can also buy it on Amazon, Mercado Libre and other stores, also department stores and more. So it is relatively easy to find in a physical store, unlike other devices that could be much cheaper but have a more limited distribution. So let's start by talking about the design. Since this generation has had a very important change with respect to the corners, a change that many people have not liked. Although personally I liked it because it favors comfort. The bezels have been reduced with respect to the last generation, so the front looks slightly more modern in terms of its bezels, although it is true that it no longer looks so imposing due to the rounded corners. But in this specific case, I would give priority to comfort because the Galaxy S Ultra got me much more tired in my hand. Both here at the front and back, we will find Gorilla Armor 2, a glass that avoids reflections perfectly well. In fact, it has improved over the last generation in that sense. Although it does not show such an abysmal difference, but where it has also improved is against falls, according to official figures from Samsung. It has 29% more resistance with respect to falls than the last generation, so it could have a good level of resistance. In fact, I already told you in the recount that in other channels where they have done drop test, it has held up quite well. So you could have some level of confidence, although obviously you have to take care of it. But against accidents, I think it has a good chance of surviving, so it doesn't disappoint at all in resistance. On the sides, we are going to find metal frames with titanium cover. So they are also going to be quite hard frames that again can get to defend in a good way. This will protect the device from any type of fall. On the right side, we will find the power button along with volume buttons. On the top, we find two small perforations that will probably be for noise cancelling microphone and pickup microphone. And on the left, we have the side completely clean. In this case, it has a thickness of 82 millimeters. So it is also more refined with respect to the last generation. While at the bottom, we will find the slot for the S Pen, which is now a little more to the side. And we also have the speaker with a single perforation, as is the new line of Samsung design that debuted since the last generation. And we also find the USB-C port, another microphone and the slot to place two SIM cards, although in some distributors possibly the second slot is blocked. But fortunately it does have these capabilities. On the back we will find a smooth cover with a rather interesting style because although it has different colors like blue, black, gray or silver, most of those colors at a certain angle of light will reflect a silver hue. So let's say that the color is not so intense. It is a soft color with a glossy finish by the silver touch. However, it is still a satin finish that will not be marked with fingerprints so easily. The design personally I liked, and remember that in this case also has Gorilla Armor 2 to resist falls well. The design of the cameras has been a bit controversial. Remember that Samsung premiered this design with floating rings, although it is a very subtle detail. A little difficult to notice, and if you use a case you will not notice it. The controversial thing was that these rings can become detached if you apply pressure on them. Obviously not something that the user does on a daily basis. So personally I don't consider that to be such a big deal, but therein lies the open controversy. And in addition to the colors I mentioned to you, there are also exclusive colors online, which is deep black, jade green and rose gold. So the color palette is quite extended, and I think that can also be a positive point. If one of your priorities is aesthetics in this device, you have a lot of options. And finally, with respect to resistance, it has the IP level of resistance against water and dust. That is to say that it can be submerged even at a depth of 1.5 meters for 30 minutes and it will have very high chances of surviving. So accidental falls into the water, I think you should not worry too much, or even if you want to use it underwater. Although here goes the usual recommendation, and is that if you are going to take pictures underwater, in the pool or in the sea, you can reach it. It is not recommended, but ideally you should not put the cell phone at too shallow a depth and do this activity for a short time and then rinse it well with pure water. Since these certifications and resistance levels are obtained in pure water and controlled conditions, in fact, in this aspect, we could start to ask something more to Samsung. Because, for example, the iPhone supports greater depth and other Chinese manufacturers are starting to try IP that even would withstand pressurized jets of hot water, so Samsung is lagging a little bit behind. Although still IP68 is obviously good enough for the vast majority of users because it protects you from accidents mainly. So I think in design it's simply a bit more refined, slightly sleeker and more comfortable. If you're one of those looking for a revolutionary change from one generation to the next in terms of design, you won't find it here. But let me know what you think in the comments. The screen has a size of 6'9" inches, is one of the largest screens in the mobile industry, then we will find a tremendous space to display content. In this case, it is thanks to the fact that it has 15% less borders than the last generation. So without increasing the size, we did get a slightly more spacious screen. The resolution is very high. 30,120 x 1,440 pixels, so it's a very high level of detail that the screen achieves, specifically 498 pixels per inch. Although a través of software, the actual resolution that projects is full HD, but you can raise it up to Quad HD if you see it necessary. However, you will consume a little more battery. But I think that for day-to-day it's not necessary to raise the screen resolution. It would be interesting to see an automatic adaptation of this setting, but in this case it is completely manual. However, in this case, Samsung implements an improvement at the software level called ProScaler, which is not something that you can turn on or off, but it comes on by default. And what it will do is it will enhance through software the detail of everything that you're viewing, like to try to see sharper images and things like that. All this with artificial intelligence, so you as a user, as I say, you don't turn on or off any option and it applies to all the content that you see on the screen. We are in front of a dynamic AMOLED 2X panel, just like the last generation. So at the hardware level, there is no evolution. Although the last generation was already a very good screen that offers us very good colors and good contrast. In this case, you have two settings. If you want vivid colors or colors a little more natural and soft. And in the vivid setting, you have also a manual white balance. And also specifically, you can calibrate RGB in all colors and also the level of intensity or saturation that you want the screen to reach. So I think it has the necessary parameters to have the best display you want. It also has the adaptive color tone option that supposedly will adapt the white color of the environment with the white color of the system. This is similar option to True Tone on the iPhone. However, I must say that on this device it doesn't work as well as it should. I mean, I have tested it and in cold light environments actually. I do not consider it something that really works. There is the option, but I recommend disabling it because the results are not the desired. Hopefully Samsung will update it to improve it. But for now, it does not seem to me something very remarkable. Within the advanced options also includes an option that can give more brightness to the videos you are playing. It can be useful if you are playing a series or movie in a very bright environment and you want more lighting on the screen. It is compatible with Netflix, YouTube, and some other applications, and also has the option of Super HDR that will help to give much more realism to the photos and videos you capture with this device and other compatible devices. This causes the screen to suddenly get very bright in some areas. So if you do not like too much the effect, you can disable it within the advanced options. Fortunately, it is something that has a switch so you can turn it off. You as the user choose whether you like it or not. Obviously that with the option enabled it looks spectacular, but I insist. The high brightness could get to bother some people, and in this case, it is a screen that varies its refresh rate from 1 to 120 Hz. So it is quite efficient. As for energy consumption, if you have static content, will not consume as much energy and with movements can get up to show you a lot of fluidity in this case if it is automatically adapting. Or you can manually set it to 60 Hz if you want to save more battery. And with respect to brightness, in this case the highest brightness is 2600 nits. This when you are watching HDR content. Since remember that it does have support for all of this. But the reality of things is that outdoor viewing is not only benefited by the peak brightness, because in fact there are brighter screens in theory, but thanks to the Gorilla Armor 2 glass that integrates this device. Reflections are avoided in an excellent way, so the outdoor viewing is simply perfect. You can even compare it with the iPhone or other devices and the screen is going to look great. Definitely that we can say that this is one of its strongest points thanks to the anti-reflective glass. Although we also see this in Galaxy S24 Ultra. So overall, I think the Galaxy S24 Ultra becomes an excellent choice to purchase when the S25 Ultra comes out, but not. We take the spotlight away from this device in this video review. Regarding the minimum brightness, it is quite comfortable, and also if you have the extra dimming options within the accessibility options. So you can also have a very comfortable experience at night. And since I mentioned low brightness, I should tell you about a new feature that is present here that wasn't there before. If you've used any Galaxy device, you'll have noticed that when it reaches 5% battery, the screen, you are considerably lowered in brightness and no longer allows you to raise it. Now in the battery settings, you can disable this option so that even if you only have 5% of battery left, you can still have the screen set to a high brightness. Something that is very much appreciated at the level of user experience. So we are in front of a really very good screen, although it still has things to improve, for example, a rate of attenuation. Samsung does not officially communicate its figure. But according to different sources, it is a screen that does not have such a high attenuation rate. This means that when you use the lowest brightness at night, if you are very sensitive, you could perceive some flickering or some visual fatigue, something that does not happen in screens that have a very high attenuation rate. Personally, I have not perceived a real difference and I have tried both screens, so I think that for a large number of users is a fact that goes unnoticed, but it is. It is important to mention this for those who are a bit more sensitive to this kind of thing. That is one of the points where it can improve, and the natural tone section that through software I think they could perfect. In all other respects, it is an excellent screen. Regarding the sound, we will find an extraordinary quality. In this case, I do notice a difference compared to the last generation, especially in the power of the bass frequencies, which are now perceived a little more present, and they definitely round out a good sound quality. It also has a good volume, and at the highest volume, it doesn't get any kind of distortion. Let's listen to a little test. Oh, remember, it's not the same as listening to it live. Specifically, the bottom speaker is the one with the most power and bass frequencies. The secondary speaker is still a little weaker in this regard, so it's not a symmetrical sound. But overall the sound really is very good, even with the default equalization. And you still have a 9-band EQ available that you can customize. Although curiously the lower frequencies are completely locked and you can't manipulate them. I insist that I don't even need to access the equalizer, because by default it gives a very good sound. Still, you have different presets, and you also have Dolby Atmos for a more immersive sound experience, and technologies like Adapt Sound or an UHQ optimizer that also helps you in terms of the headphone experience to improve. The sharpness depending on how you listen to it. In fact, since we are talking about headphones, you should know that like all the high-end, it does not have a jack, so if you want zero latency, you need to use an adapter with USB-C. But if you opt for wireless headphones, it has good support for codecs such as aptX, LDAC and Samsung's own SSC codec, with its latest version that allows you audio in very high resolution. This last codec is exclusive for when you use Galaxy Buds, so as you can see, it has a good support, but for being high-end. We could also ask for support for the LHDC codec that we don't see available on this device. So if you have high-resolution headphones, just check which codec it has so you can take advantage of its full capabilities on this device. And while we're on the subject of apps and Bluetooth, it's also worth noting the standalone application sound feature, which is something that is still not integrated into the vast majority of cell phones. It's an option, we could say, exclusive to the Galaxy. It seems to me that Vivo integrates something similar, and what it allows you to do is to send the sound of some applications via Bluetooth while keeping the sound of other applications on the cell phone. So it would allow you to be listening to music at a party, for example, while you can listen to WhatsApp audio or watch a video that you have sent directly on the phone without affecting the playback of the Bluetooth speaker. So it's a feature that I do find useful and I haven't seen present in many devices. And it should also be said that Samsung has an app called Sound Assistant that you can install on it to tweak even more things. I can tell you in depth about this in another video, so when I have it ready, I will have in the description that link to see all the modifications you can have through Good Lock, which is a Samsung application that unlocks even more possibilities. But let's keep moving forward in this block, and we have to talk now about its microphones, which in this case are 4 distributed around the device, and those we could say are the visible ones, because sometimes some come half hidden or something like that, trying to also work for noise cancellation. So let's listen to a test.
Un audio grabado con los micrófonos del Galaxy S25 Ultra en un ambiente silencioso.
It's clear that the microphones pick up voice very well. In fact, for calls, it also has additional noise cancellation, and if you're on a video call or on a call through special apps, you can configure whether you want the audio to come with cancellation or you want it to go completely. Of course, it can be useful with music that you suddenly cancel if it has noise cancellation. So here you can select whether or not you want cancellation. It seems to me something very positive, but now let's test it in a much noisier environment to see how it behaves. The microphones definitely adjust the gain excellently. Even when there's too much noise, the microphone doesn't get saturated at any point. So if you like to record concerts, you should know that the audio will not be distorted. Although in this case, in the camera settings, this device has an option called directional microphone. What it will do is that when zooming, the microphone gain is increased to try to direct well the audio to what you are recording. This could give you some weird results if you're recording a blog, for example, and you are talking into the camera and suddenly you zoom in to point at something. You will notice that the audio is going to focus in that direction and you will stop hearing your voice a little bit. So this is a setting that you could, if you want to be talking and have your voice captured well while you are recording something with Zoom, that is a very important thing to consider. It also has a 360 audio recording option, this in conjunction with your Galaxy Buds. So if you want an even more immersive audio experience at a concert or something like that, you can have your headphones on and use them to record this 360 audio. And finally, they recently added this option that you can turn on, so you can be playing music while recording a video. Previously, the music would stop completely, but now you have this option as long as you don't have some Bluetooth accessory that you can take advantage of. So as you realize, the audio experience is completely good. To close this block, you should know that the vibration motor that this device has is on the x-axis, so it's a very premium vibration that is actually perceived as a little bump or little bounces on the cell phone, and you can take advantage of it throughout the system when you slide something or when you turn on a switch and the like. And through the settings, you can also regulate the intensity of this vibration in different parameters. So in this block, I think everything is perfect, except for the absence of the LHDC codec, but it seems to me something very punctual. In the rest of things, the experience is very good. The front camera is 12 megapixels with f2.2 aperture and autofocus, and comes placed in a circular perforation inside the screen. In terms of hardware, it is a camera that does not see evolution with respect to past generations, and I think that here we could get a little more demanding. Although in a moment we will see the results that are very good in the day, but especially at night is where you see that it is a camera that is several generations ago. Hopefully Samsung does something to improve this, because I think it can become one of its weakest points, especially in video recording, because I think that the photography, it does benefit from the processor, which is very powerful, so it's going to improve the photos a lot, but it does feel like a bit of a weak camera in dimly lit environments. As you know, Samsung has the shortcut of pressing the power button twice to quickly access the camera, even if the device is locked, which makes it much easier to capture. And remember that in this case, you can slide from top to bottom or from bottom to top to rotate the camera, which also is another easy gesture. In fact, if you're already on the camera and you double press the power button, it's also going to do this rotation. So the experience is very refined. Notice that it gives you 2 levels of width for the picture. And in this case, even though I'm in a backlit environment, we see a wide enough capture. If I were in a non-backlit environment, it's going to be even more agile capture. So I see that it's a good experience. Consider also that you have the palm gesture available for a much more comfortable capture when the shutter is hard to press. Of course, you can also press the volume button, or in the settings you can enable still other ways. For example, voice command will be available, which in fact I would recommend disabling it to take some load off the processor, and is a feature I personally don't use, but it comes enabled by default. And you also have the floating shutter option, which would allow you to move this shutter to where you want it to be much more comfortable, and you can press it. If you want to remove it, you can just move it back to where it came from, and that's it. And as you notice, the interface comes much cleaner than last generation. You have indicators at the top that are in a small size, so they are indicators, but you can also click on them if you want to modify some setting. However, to see the full list of adjustments, you have the button in the bottom right corner that's going to give you access to everything. So from here, for example, you also have available a timer with different settings, the motion image capture, so that you can save a small video of this photo. You also have the exposure compensation, which can be useful, for example, in these backlit scenarios or in very dark scenarios where sometimes cameras overexpose too much of the result. So you can have this compensation locked in, which I find quite useful, and not all devices integrate it. We are also going to find here the selector of different filters that you can preview in real time. And in this case, they're not just filters, they're ways of interpreting color. So notice that you have an intensity adjustment at the top, temperature, contrast, saturation, and grain. So you have different ways of interpreting color. But the most attractive thing about this is that not only can you have the default filters, but you could use some other image as a color interpretation. So for example, let's say you're on Instagram and you see that someone uploaded a picture that you like the way it looks edited. So just to give you an example, you could select the picture and just select that you want to save it for later. From the camera application, in this section of the color rendition, choose this image. The device is going to be an analysis of how it interprets colors and more, and is going to apply it to your photograph. So let's say you could have a team similar to other people's by simply uploading one of their photos. In fact, through the Samsung store, you could also go in and download all the filters you want. And there's lots and lots of it available. So in this sense, it also offers too broad an experience. Notice that Samsung also includes facial retouching tools in this menu. In this case with 4 different parameters, with different intensity setting if you want to modify your skin. And you'll also notice that a natural or warmer tone rendition is available depending on the setting you want. In our test, we use the natural setting. Finally, if you hold down the shutter, you can start recording a video, and if you slide down the shutter, you can do burst capture. In a sense, the camera results of this device remind me a bit of the iPhone's rendition. That is, it still maintains some graininess to give a more textured feel. For some reason, it seems that Samsung has somehow followed in these footsteps. It's a relatively wide camera for photos, but since it has autofocus, you can even be a little bit closer to the camera and it's still going to maintain a good level of depth, although the image resolution is not exaggeratedly high. But note that it does have a good level of detail in good lighting situations. The previous ones were of cloudy days, but now note that even on sunny days we will also have a good result. The color seems to me to be what it manages best, and I insist that it gives a special emphasis to the textures, so the quality is good, even up close with very good lighting. He knows that we would have a positive result in terms of level of detail, textures, colors, and more. So despite the fact that at the hardware level there is no evolution in this camera, the results are honestly very good in photo. And obviously remember that you can zoom in on an object and the camera will focus on it perfectly well, since it does have autofocus. In indoor scenes, note that it still maintains a very good level of detail, as I said, but the color is the one that seems to me to be a little distorted. It looks a bit greenish in this setting, which was a bit warmer, so the color might lose accuracy in warm environments. In backlit scenarios, note that the preview is not optimized, which I find curious, because for example, if you are going to record video, the preview does look a little better optimized, but regardless of the preview, note that the result is positive. In this case, we were talking about an intense backlit scenario, although still the most illuminated area could be noticed slightly overexposed. So it's not a perfect result, but it's a positive result. In this case, the shadow area still looks like a shadow scene, it is not overexposed, but the highlight area is the one that I think is slightly more overexposed than it should be. And for night scenes, note that the result is still positive, although there is less detail than we saw in better lit situations. In addition, we are still going to notice the presence of some graininess in order to accentuate some textures, although it seems to me that it is a grain in excess compared to what we see in some other devices. But if you compare it with the iPhone, it will surely be a fairly similar result. Even in night backlit scenarios, we are going to see a good result. Although in this case, if we are going to notice a little more aggressive algorithm to remove noise and grain, note practically not noticeable in these darker areas. So it also raises a little more contrast. However, the most illuminated areas will still look overexposed. If you use the screen as a flash simulation, notice that even more noise and grain appears in the darker areas, and the rendering will be even better. Color detection is confused even more because the screen illumination is too cold, so it is not so recommended to use this assistance. But if you use the night mode, you are going to have a very similar result to the automatic mode. It just strikes me that even in night mode, it is still not able to correctly expose the most illuminated areas of the photo. And now look at what would be the result with portrait mode. It seems to me that it loses a bit of color saturation compared to the automatic mode, and the presence of a bit of noise generates some artifacts in the darker areas that are completely eliminated in the autofocus area, so it looks slightly strange. But I think it can still be acceptable. On the other hand, portraits in the day seem to me of very good quality because of the nice bokeh effect that is generated in the background. It maintains a good level of detail in the face, but note that perhaps the detection of the edges in the hair area, it can get to look a little bit strange, with a slightly cloudy effect, and objects seem to be missed by 100% in some situations. But notice how in other scenarios it can get to have a little bit more accurate detection of objects. However, it still has some areas of inaccuracy. Note that in this scenario there are some clearly marked figures that are out of focus, and I insist that the treatment of hair is a little complicated in this type of scenarios. So the portraits with the front camera I think are another point where this device should improve. Let's go now to talk about the rear cameras. We are going to find a 13mm ultra-wide camera with a new 50 megapixel sensor. This is new compared to the last generation. It comes with f1.9 aperture, which is also a novelty, so it has a much better light entry with autofocus, so it has macro capabilities. It's a camera that does see a lot of improvements over what we saw in the last generation. The rest of the cameras will be the same. The main camera of 200 megapixels with f1.7 aperture, autofocus and optical stabilization. Since it is a high-resolution camera, you can apply crops on it to have other telephoto perspectives. Then we come to the camera that has 3x zoom. It is specifically 69mm with a sensor of only 10 megapixels and aperture f2.4, autofocus and stabilization, optics. This is the camera we are going to criticize the most because the results themselves will show that it is a weak camera. Then we come to the 50 megapixel camera with focal length of 115mm. That is about 5x optical zoom with aperture f3.4, autofocus and optical stabilization. And since it is a high-resolution camera, you can apply crops on it to have good digital zoom. Galaxy S25 Ultra users will surely still be very proud of its telephoto camera with 10x optical zoom, which is certainly very good, especially at long range, but specifically in daytime. It must be said that in that camera, the aperture is much more close, so in low light conditions or at night, they will have an inferior performance to this device. This I say only as a reference data, but in a moment, we see the results. For now, what needs to be emphasized is that Samsung needs to improve the 3x zoom camera, the next generation, because we have been many years with exactly the same camera, which in the day obviously still has a good performance, but then you're going to notice that it is a very weak camera. Notice that the camera performs well with quick captures. It is not perceived to stay very clumsy, although it is not the fastest response I've seen in smartphones. Remember that if you swipe down, you can access a burst, in this case up to 100 photos. And please note how it has an automatic macro mode, meaning that if I zoom in a little bit, it will change and actually use the ultra-wide camera. In the lower left corner is the auto macro button that you can disable so that it uses the main camera and does not make this force change. It depends entirely on your common user tastes, but personally I like to disable this option, as the ultra-wide camera, although it has improved in this generation, is still inferior to the main camera. Notice how at the bottom we have all the controls for zooming, And even the ultra-wide zoom controls are available when you start tapping on them. And all the controls that we saw for the different color renditions that we have available are still available, along with the option to upload your own image to simulate or mimic that same coloration. And you also have access to beauty mode with the same for the front camera. In this case, the main camera can take pictures at 12, 50 or 200 megapixels. The 24 megapixel setting would be available only if you enter the expert RAW function, which through this application, you're going to be able to take pictures also very good quality, but it seems to me that it's time for Samsung to integrate the 24 megapixel mode on the main interface. If you tap on the screen, you can also adjust the exposure compensation or focus. And as I was telling you, you also have the exposure compensation control directly in the general setting. But of course, for more professional things, you can enter the Pro mode. In this mode, you're gonna be able to manipulate other things like ISO, which can go up to 3200, which is actually not as high as other devices, shutter speed up to 30 seconds. There's also compensation, focus and metering type plus white balance. Notice that at the top there are also other controls such as the exposure monitor, which could also give you a graphical expression of the areas that are slightly overexposed depending on the level that you determines. And in the special menu we find another additional calibration for hue, also intensity of highlights or shadows, saturation and tint. So you can customize to a very strong level the whole picture that you're going to get. And in the settings, you can also select whether you want to save the images in JPG or RAW or a combination of both. And also how you want the photos to behave in motion, which is this little video that you record if you have. Enabled option. We also find the watermark option, which is a bit simple compared to the watermark that most Chinese manufacturers handle. It is something that I would like Samsung to improve, and again, through good luck, you would have access to more modifications through Camera Assistant. Then here you can still change many more things that I will tell you in another video that is available in the description, showing you each of the modules available in good luck. So through software, Samsung offers too many options, and with respect to intelligent capture options, note that in this case, when you focus on a document, immediately appears a letter T in the lower right corner, and when you click on it, immediately will be the intelligent recognition of the text that has that document. Or you can also select the scan button if you want to make the immediate cut to save it. However, note that only saved as a cropped image. Unlike other manufacturers that apply color optimization and allow you to add more pages, in this case Samsung is still a bit more limited. Although it does let you extract the text in digital format, and with respect to QR codes will detect them immediately from the main interface so that with a single touch you can perform the action that is mapped. The ultra-wide camera outdoors seems to me to have a good behavior. In this case, I think the level of detail if it is benefited with the use of a higher resolution sensor. Although in terms of the automatic camera, the device anyway takes pictures of 12 megapixels, it should be noted that the quality of the lens is not so high. So if it generates some chromatic aberration and certain distortions in the edges, which I think in a way is something natural so wide cameras. But I do wish that being such an expensive device, it would deal better with this kind of drawbacks. It is not a severe distortion, but you can get to notice it, especially if there are objects with light behind, as it will lose quite a bit of detail on those edges. The main camera takes very good pictures, also in 12 megapixels with automatic mode, and we see good color management. We even see a lens with a little more quality, so it deals slightly better with chromatic aberration. I don't see any distortions, but it strikes me that it still generates chromatic aberration. Something that usually in the main camera of most smartphones looks a little better, even if we see a little distortion. So it doesn't look to me like Samsung is using the best it has in this device. The 3x zoom camera is gonna give us 12 megapixel pictures, which is curious because the sensor isn't actually 12 megapixels. So it looks like it somehow tries to interpolate some pixel interpolation to improve detail, but overall it doesn't look like a very detailed photograph. Possibly this is the weakest camera of all, and notes that jumping to the 5x zoom camera we are indeed going to get much better detail. So I insist that the X camera is the one that has the lowest quality in photography. In fact, this camera with 5x zoom, you will notice that it does not generate distortions or anything strange on the edges. So it looks to me like it has very good image quality. And with the crop to get to zoom 10x, if you notice that it's digital zoom, So we will still see, for example, a little more detail in the Galaxy S25 Ultra in very well lit environments, although here it benefits you that it has better aperture in the 5x lens. So it would have better light entry, but we will check that in testing scenarios with less illumination. This device does allow us to take pictures at 24 megapixels, but you need to use the Expert RAW application. I would like this setting to come in the native application of this camera, because if you notice an improvement in the level of detail, even from the ultra wide camera can take pictures of 24 megapixels. So the behavior is really nice. Look at the 24 megapixel result with the main camera. It also looks really nice in terms of detail, and with this, I would match the iPhone in level of detail with the automatic mode. But I insist in this case you must use the Expert RAW app, which is designed by Samsung, and in fact you have direct access from the main camera. But just as a suggestion, I would love to see this 24 megapixel setup directly on the native camera. The 3x zoom camera does not have the ability to take pictures in 24 megapixels, just so you know, because I insist, it's only a 10 megapixel camera, so it doesn't have as many capabilities in terms of level of detail. But the 5x zoom camera is going to give us this 24 megapixel quality, and as I say, it certainly shows. It gives us very well detailed and very good quality pictures. But let's move on to indoor scenarios where the lighting is lower, and in this case it was warm lighting, and I have to say that this device didn't interpret the colors very well because it has neutral lighting in the end. Result, so it's not a bad picture, but it's not that realistic. In this case, even the yellow color is a bit affected due to this incorrect white balance it could get. Then in color for the strictest, maybe it is not so accurate, but look now at the result with the main camera. It is still consistent with the color of the ultra-wide camera, which is positive. Although I would have liked it to be more accurate, but still has good contrast and overall a very good level of detail. With the 3x zoom camera, we see something very similar, although the colors start to lose slight saturation. But generally speaking, it does maintain good consistency between the color of all the cameras. Even with the 5x zoom camera, we see exactly the same color, and if you apply 10x, we see the same color. So in summary, in these warm lighting scenarios, the device maintains a good color experience between all of its cameras, which is good. But if we wanted it more realistic, we can use the Pro mode, and in this case adjust the white balance manually. And with this I did achieve a much more realistic result. In this case, this is how warm the scene looked. But for some reason, the device prefers to have a more neutral interpretation of the white color, which is not necessarily bad, but it is good that you know. So it's not a device that stays very true to the colors of reality. With the automatic rendering it does at night is another example, as here we were also using warm lighting, but in this case it transforms it a bit more to neutral lighting. With the ultra-wide camera, you are going to notice that it has serious problems handling noise. In auto mode, it generates a lot of noise and grain, and you notice a lot of artifacts in these dark areas. So it's not a quality to brag about. With the night mode, fortunately the photography improves. Even the most illuminated area gets to expose it slightly better, and where the improvement is most noticeable is in the darkest areas. Where the presence of this excessive noise is practically eliminated, note that we see a much more natural result. So it is highly recommended to use the night mode with the ultra-wide camera. In fact, with the main camera, something very similar happens. Note that it is actually a bad picture for the price level. Believe me, it's lousy photography. In these scenarios, the device suffers a lot when it is a night photo with a light source present because it is not able to expose well the light source. It is not able to expose well the darker areas because they are full of noise and grainy, and even in this case, observe how there is an area that takes a very yellow pigmentation that definitely speaks very badly of a device of this price. With night mode, fortunately, it improves. That's why I insist that at night you need to use night mode, which I find a little bit strange because there are other scenarios where automatically the device enables night mode. But in night scenarios where there is a light source present, which I think is the norm, you're going to notice that it suffers tremendously if you don't use night mode. So you need to enable night mode in these scenarios and the photography will definitely improve a lot, especially because it's no longer full of noise. It even takes away this weird pigmentation that it had in terms of lighting. Although, if you get really picky, you'll notice the presence of some reddish spots in this test that could possibly be replicated in some other scenarios. Obviously, this won't happen all the time, but in this test it did happen. The 3x zoom camera observes that it performs very similarly to what we were seeing in auto mode, that is a picture. The noise and grain is not quite up to what you would expect from such an expensive device. And if you use the night mode in this case, in fact it is not even able to improve too much, which shows the weakness of this camera with zoom 3x that we had already said several times. But we say it again, it is the weakest of them all. And with zoom 5x, it complicates the scenario a little bit more because of the aperture, which is much more close, so it doesn't have as much light coming in, but it's the weakest of all of them. Curiously, through software, I think it manages to give a good performance. The most illuminated area does not look completely burned. If you get to still appreciate the texture of the wall that was lost in other cameras and the darker area, although it does not show as much detail or as much lighting, I think it is a fairly real result, and in this case, controls noise well enough. If you use the night mode, you will notice that it will work mostly on eliminating noise, and the result looks more attractive. So it's confirmed you have to use night mode. In this other type of scenario where the light source is not present within the frame, you'll notice that it automatically enables night mode, and this improves the results without you having to enter night mode manually. So here you are seeing the result with the ultra-wide camera. On the plus side, it handles the darker areas well because there are no artifacts or excessive noise. So the result is very good. Well, with the main camera, we see something very similar. It handles well the color of the brightest area and perfectly well the exposure of the darkest area to avoid unwanted noise. If you try to apply 3x zoom in these type of scenarios where there is more darkness, you will notice that the device will use digital zoom instead of optical zoom. So you are going to have little detail, but more light input compared to using only the 3x camera. And with 5x, note that the result is quite curious. In this type of scenarios, it loses a lot of contrast. The darkest area is going to lighten too much. So I think that in night zoom, we are not going to find a good solution. In backlit scenarios, note that the preview is very well optimized. That's a very positive thing. The results will also be positive. In this case, you see the ultra-wide camera has a very good balance of light and shadow, although as I anticipated, generates this chromatic aberration that you can get to distinguish, especially on the edges in these areas of separation between shadow and light. So the most demanding will notice this kind of details, and in such an expensive device they are not so nice. But talking specifically about the balance of light and shadow, the main camera also does a good job. Even applying zoom, we see a good job in the balance of light and shadow, something that other devices lose. And in this sense, if you will see evolution with respect to the Galaxy S23 Ultra. For example, this would be the Galaxy S23 Ultra preview, and this would be the Galaxy S25 Ultra preview. Definitely that has improved. In fact, this is an improvement from the last generation. So definitely the Galaxy S24 Ultra is an excellent choice to buy as of now. But here are the results, just so you can see another carousel of backlit photos. I mean, the shade and the highlight area still looks slightly overexposed. It seems to me that they could still improve this photo capture to make it have a higher quality. Besides that, again, we will notice some very marked distortions in the edges of this ultra-wide camera that are not very pleasing. With the main camera, we see a better treatment of the backlight. The most illuminated areas do not look so overexposed, and with the rest of the cameras, we also see a good performance. If you are in a well-lit environment, the movements with the main camera are captured well. But if you are in a shadowy environment or indoors, it is going to be complicated to capture the movements. With the ultra-wide camera, something similar happens in shadows. It doesn't capture them very well, but in lights it does. And something that I found very curious is that with the 3x camera in shadows, it does capture the movements well, even obviously also in lights. So this is the only thing in which the 3x camera outperforms its companions, as the 5x zoom camera will obviously have more trouble defining movements if you are in shadows, although in highlights it does perform well. For macro photography, the device prefers to use the ultra-wide camera to have a very close focus, and you can achieve it, although at the same time it is not a very uniform focus. So you will have to focus very well on the object or thing you want to photograph. This is as close as you could get with the main camera, so note that it definitely does give you a very different level of close-up to have the ultra-wide camera. But if you try to use digital zoom with the main camera, I think the result is nice. Look at the level of macro photography that we could get with good detail. If you try to put a higher zoom like 3x is going to use digital zoom, so it's not going to use the telephoto camera. This device doesn't have any capabilities. Telemacro, however, this will be the result with the telephoto camera at the closest you can focus, and anyway, I think it has a good performance, although it is not the most advanced in mobile photography. Because we would see that if it had telemacro capabilities as we have seen in Huawei or Xiaomi. And remember that Samsung includes to its interface multiple selectors to configure the style of your photograph. Even some of them add a bit of grainy, which is quite curious. It seems to me that it can be useful if you are a fan of someone and you like how they edit their photos on this device. Practically, you can upload their photo and ask the Galaxy to mimic the same color rendering and the same rendering of lights and shadows and other things to create your own style of photography. And to conclude a little bit better with respect to the zoom handling, notice how in this case we see a good quality of images. In this case, we're looking at 5x zoom, which would be the maximum optical zoom that is built into the device. Next, zoom 10x, and it seems to me that Samsung has improved in the sense of not overdoing the sharpness. In past generations, you would notice in these areas an over sharpness that caused the result did not look so natural. Now Samsung has improved in that aspect. And note that in this case, in zoom 30x also has a good algorithm so that objects look well defined enough. Obviously, you can tell it's digital zoom and its algorithm is focused on enhancing well-defined figures and text. In fact, when you have the maximum zoom, which is 100x, you will notice that the letters are optimized very well. For capturing text at long distances, it's obviously going to be very good. But the more abstract figures, you're going to notice that they look quite strange. So, maximum zoom is only useful on signs or symbols. Notice again, this is a 5x zoom photograph, which is the maximum optical zoom. And next we're going to try to zoom in a little bit more. This is a photograph with 10x zoom, then 30x and the maximum 100x. As you notice, the more abstract shaped figures are not going to look very nice at 100x zoom. But at 30x zoom, I think it still has remarkably good quality. And let's go with one last carousel of zoom pictures, just to show you how good the zoom is. I think it's a device that can really compete very well in terms of zoom. It would be good to compare it with some other exponents. In this case, you're looking at maximum zoom, and I think this is a good example. Notice how the letters and symbols it tries to perfect, but more abstract figures, it is not able to optimize them so well. But I insist it would be very interesting to compare it with other devices. This is an example with 30x zoom, and this is an example with 100x zoom. We will compare the zoom camera soon to see if it is the best or not. It is not the best. Finally, let's take a look at portraits and note that in this case it does get to keep objects in focus well. We're going to notice good detection as well. Unlike the front camera, we see a better treatment for the hair area. The lens area also seems to me that it manages to solve it well enough, although you do get to notice that it is an artificial effect, especially if you zoom in too much on the image. And as you know, the device allows us to take portrait pictures from different focal lengths. So the ideal is to use a telephoto perspective to have a much more professional result. And note, in this case, the level of portraiture that the 5x zoom camera gives us is excellent. The detection of objects is very good. Even the edges of the hair is excellent how it detects them. The truth is very good in this type of portrait photography, probably the best we are going to see in the industry, with a very natural result, a good level of detail, good color, and even with a very good behavior against backlight. Note, in this case, the scene has highlights and shadows, and if we see a slightly overexposed light area if you get too fussy, but for the testing, I found it to be a very pleasing result. Look at this additional example, just to make it very clear to you that this is an excellent exponent of portrait photography. I love how he has managed to keep even these tiny hairs in focus, and it doesn't look like a strange effect. For video recording, you'll find tremendous capabilities in this device. The ultra-wide main and periscope can record up to 4K at 30 frames per second, something we previously saw only available for the main camera. So we see a very good evolution with the main camera and the ultra-wide camera. You could also record up to 4K at 120 frames per second to have a cinematic slow motion. I wish the periscope camera also had these capabilities, but the maximum capability available on all cameras, including the front camera, is 4K at 60 frames per second, which speaks very well how very good. Capabilities. In fact, here they might stand out over competitors that don't offer you such advanced recordings. But Samsung's main strength in this aspect, as in many others, is the software. In this case, by default, the videos are going to be recorded in HDR, similar to what happens with the iPhone. Although, obviously, you can turn it off with a single touch in a very simple way. In the additional options, note that we will find the exposure control setting if it is that you need it, and we'll also find this automatic framing. So notice how without me having to move the cell phone, even if the person moves, goes from one side to the other, we're going to notice that it stays always framed. This is a function that could also help you when you don't have someone to help you record, although in this case it only records in full HD when you have that tool. And if you choose to record in full HD, you will also have access to these filters or these color renditions available that we were seeing also in the photograph. But if you record in 4K, this option disappears. When recording a video, notice that we have available this selector for different zoom settings. But here the interesting thing is that a new button appears that has a magnifying glass, and through this button, you change the style of zooming. This is a very good thing because previously other Chinese manufacturers offered you only this slider that could be useful in some scenarios to zoom in slowly. But they didn't offer quick switching between cameras. In this case, Samsung has combined the best of both. So if you want quick switching between cameras, you have immediate access. Or if you want to switch to a smooth zoom, you can have that available as well. So it's quite convenient to zoom in and out. You also have here the macro mode or focus optimizer, and you're going to have the ability to take pictures while you're recording and also turn on the flashlight, and even this flashlight now already. You can turn it on even if you are using the ultra wide camera, which was not allowed before. You'll also find an option to pause and resume video recording, and even the option to rotate to the front camera without stopping your video recording. So it has a lot of options that really make your recording experience a very positive one, unlike other cell phones. At the top, you will also find the super stable mode button that you can activate perfectly. And although here in the interface you have exposure adjustment, and by touching the screen you can also make some adjustments. If you want the full list, you can enter the Video Pro where we have many more tools. For starters, we have the manual settings for ISO, shutter speed, focus, white balance, metering type, and these advanced things. In fact, we're also going to have available the tool for overexposure, or also a false color tool and more professional things to see the performance that you're recording. And if you record in full HD, you also have access to customizing the tone, the shadows, the highlights, the tint, and all these things in real time. But for professional video coloring, there's already available the log mode, which obviously by default is going to show you a kind of a pale view. And in a way, by default, it is only shown in the professional mode, but you could also ask for it to be shown in the main interface. As I say, by default, you see a pale video, but this requires much more professional editing. This is the way it is recorded at a professional level, so it requires editing. But I love that it is already available on this cell phone. It is not the first because we had already seen it present on some other brands. But at least it beat the iPhone that. It still does not integrate this, and note that in the settings, we also have even more advanced things. For example, you can configure the video to be recorded at a high bit rate that allows you to avoid certain artifacts or certain pixelated mode that you get to see when there are very fast movements. Although obviously it will consume more battery and more storage, but it is very good to have the option available. All the tests we did were with this mode disabled because it is the default mode. By default, it records using the HEVC codec, which makes the videos not use so much storage. But it might be a bit difficult to play it on some devices that are not so modern, so you can choose the format in which you want to record. And that would be basically all the options that we see on this device when recording video. The fact of allowing you to record videos in 4K would allow you, for example, to resize the video in post-production and still appreciate an excellent level of detail. For example, observe in this case the entire scene. So definitely this may be more for post-production and more professional productions, but few devices today have the ability to record in this quality. Now just watch a demonstration of what it would be like to record in 4K at 60 frames per second, just so you can see the fluidity that is achieved in the movements, which also looks with a good definition. Something that I liked is that it allows you to switch between the 4 lenses recording in 4K 60 frames per second, although you can notice some of the changes between one lens and another. But I am struck by how you can even get to a zoom quite far recording with this quality. At 60 frames per second in K, and observe, this is what a video would look like in log. As I anticipated, it is a professional video, so it looks pale if you do not edit it and color it with specialized software. Now observe how it looks already colored. Obviously, it has a lot of information so that you can color it professionally in the most accurate way possible. It is what is used at the professional level. Although curiously, the device includes an option for these videos in log, you can color immediately. From the cell phone, although it will obviously use an automatic adjustment of this device, but if you want to be much more precise, you can manually go little by little correcting the color in a specialized software. Now let's look at the more traditional example. 4K at 30 frames per second and observe the quality recording with the ultra-wide camera. It seems to me that we see a good quality. Although again it seems that in the edges, as we saw in the picture, we will notice a slightly lower quality, about all because of the distortions that could be generated, although in the video being more dynamic it is not so noticeable. The good thing is that it allows us to switch between lenses without stopping the video recording. The bad thing is that the jump is quite noticeable when you click on any of these cameras. Interestingly, Samsung has now integrated a new slider to have the zoom a little smoother that we saw a moment ago, and in this case when you use that slider you will notice that the zoom is smooth and the change between is not that noticeable in the cameras, but when you click on one of the shortcuts to each of the lenses you will notice the change a lot. However, note here the quality, in this case the maximum zoom allowed when recording video is 20x and it's a very good quality, and see how I return with a smooth zoom. And in this case is not so noticeable jump between one. And the other lens, in that sense, if it retains a good video quality, and best of all is that if it retains a very similar color rendition, the HDR quality of the video is very good. But it is also very good in each of the lenses. So it practically feels as if it were a single camera in terms of color. Although some small jumps can be noticed when we are manipulating the zoom. The videos you had previously seen were recorded in SDR, but now they are recorded in HDR converted to SDR, so you can watch them even if you don't have a compatible display. It's a little strange because Samsung now records in HDR by default, so you just have to be careful, because if you play it back on unsupported screens or try to edit it without the proper treatment, you might notice that the video will look very burnt and you would think it is a defect of the cell phone or something. But actually, it is due to this HDR recording quality that honestly gives a lot of realism to the results, because some areas of the video could emit more lighting than others, so it is very professional in this sense. Now look at the results we have indoors. In this case with the ultra-wide camera, I think the result is very positive. Again, we are using HDR, and in this case with the ultra-wide camera. Then we switch to the main camera and there is a little bit of a bumpy feel to the switch, but I think you still see good quality, good color, good contrast, and virtually no noise, which I really like, because in video recording generally the noise is what you see in the video recording, but I think it's still good quality, good color, good contrast, and virtually no noise, which I really like, because in video recording generally the noise is what you see in the video recording. Could really complicate the results, but in this case it seems to control it well. Although in the 3x, 5x zoom camera, if we start to see a little more noise present, but it's practically imperceptible and we still see good quality. A consistent color between all cameras, so for video recording I think is pretty good, even in these indoor scenarios that could be relatively complex because there is not too much illumination. Although in this one case, as well as photography, opts for a slightly more neutral tonality, even though we were in a slightly warmer environment. As for lighting and backlit scenarios, if you have HDR enabled, you're going to have incredibly good performance. Although to reproduce it totally true to life, you should have the original video played back on an HDR monitor. I'm watching it on such a monitor, so I see it perfectly. But you're watching the conversion to SDR, which maybe you could lose a little bit of dynamic range. But you should know that the device records very well in this kind of conditions. It balances perfectly lights and shadows. You don't see aggressive jumps in the exposure, and this happens with each of the cameras, both with the ultra-wide camera and with the main camera, the 3x intermediate zoom camera and the 5x maximum zoom camera. Each of them has a very good performance. Possibly with the 3x zoom camera is where we will notice a little more noise in the darker areas, so you notice that it is the weakest camera. But if we go up to the 5x camera, you will still notice excellent performance in this type of backlit scenarios. But if you don't have an HDR monitor or want to avoid so many problems, you can also record with HDR off, and either way you have a very good result. Now you are watching this video, and the truth is that it looks very good. It no longer has the HDR information to illuminate more intensely some areas of the screen, but anyway, it is still an excellent video, even in these backlit scenarios. Now look at the result we have at night, again recorded with HDR, and the ultra-wide camera seems to me that controls the noise well. There we see a small change in the white balance at times. Remember that in this case, we had warm lighting, but Samsung opts for neutral lighting, eliminating warm tones, which I don't really like. Note that in the darker areas, some rather annoying artifacts are generated in the recording with the ultra-wide camera, so you still notice a lot of weakness with this camera recording in this kind of low light conditions. If we switch to the main camera, you will notice that suddenly the focus freezes a bit. For some reason, you have to you can use the screen or shake the device to make it react. At least that happened in my test. But the result is quite realistic. It does not give us an exaggerated illumination. But the darkest area is the one that does not convince me, where we even see a rather strange pixelated effect. In addition, Samsung continues with this trend of not exposing correctly the most illuminated areas, neither with the main camera nor with the rest of the cameras. In fact, if you switch to the intermediate zoom camera, you'll notice that it starts to suffer a lot more in the darker area, where it even has a little bit of blue pigmentation and loses contrast. However, if you go to completely dark areas without any light source present in the frame, I think the result is still acceptable, although I insist it lacks quite a bit of contrast, as the darkest area still looks too gray. And obviously, if you zoom in these very dark areas, it will give priority to use digital zoom. That is, if you want to use the zoom camera, you need to focus on a light source for the lens shift to take effect. Otherwise, we're going to notice that it's still using digital zoom. And another thing you notice is that with the 5x zoom camera, it does take these warm tones that I was telling you that we were using at least for a certain moment, but the white balance suddenly comes in to change. Also, the 5x zoom camera, I think, records with a good quality, even if the environment is not very well lit. In darker scenarios, it looks quite realistic. So from my point of view, I wish Samsung would opt to use optical zoom even in dark scenarios, because the result is positive and realistic. The digital zoom seems to me with an exaggerated illumination and evidently little detail, but definitely that Samsung has to improve the contrast. I'm not going to take a look at these night videos because they don't look very good quality. Regarding the stabilization, note that in this case we are recording with the ultra-wide camera and walking the movement is very good. Running, you will also notice that it balances very well. Obviously, the strongest movements will have a compensation that is a little more noticeable, and with the main camera, the movement will be accentuated a little more due to the closer framing. But even when running around with this camera, I think it still gives good enough results. And switching to the intermediate telephoto zoom camera, we see a still positive quality even when walking around. Obviously, running with a telephoto camera will not be recommended, but note that also with the 5x zoom camera, we see a good stabilization quality when walking, which is very much appreciated. It also has a super stable mode that you can activate. Although the resolution drops to K, however, it is still a good resolution and definitely helps to have a little more fluid movement. And you can not only use the ultra-wide camera, but also the main camera, even without stopping the video recording. So the super stable mode can help you in much more action scenes, and definitely that this device does deliver on good quality. Of course, it is not a completely perfect scene, but you have to consider that it is a quite complex scene, and it can achieve it with a good quality. In fact, it also lets you record in 2.5K at 60 frames per second with the super stable mode. So if you're the type of person who shoots action scenes, you can have this dynamic 60 frames per second available with this level of stabilization. With respect to focusing, note that the ultra-wide camera can focus, in fact, from quite a distance. The focus is very close and the change in focus is agile enough. It is not perceived to have any difficulty. Even in slow movements, the focus is still quite accurate, and the same will happen with the main camera. It is a focus that is not exaggeratedly fast, but it is in a good balance so that in fast movements, it gets to adjust well, and in slow movements, it never loses the correct focus. Then we see very accurate focusing both with the ultra-wide camera and with the main camera, and of course also with the rest of the cameras. For example, notice how with the 3x zoom camera, we can even focus on relatively close objects and we have a good quality. The focus also responds fast. But for this kind of macro or close scenes, I would recommend more the 5x lens, which has a very nice detail because of the quality of the lens and the sensor, although the focus is very much slower in its response because of all the traveling it has to do. In this type of cases, I would like to have some switch to limit the distance or range of the focus, but in general, it behaves very well. In fact, it is one of my favorite cameras to record, and curiously, it will also allow us to record in a portrait video mode that is defocusing the background. Note that it is not able to focus very well on the lens area, which is the case with photography, but in general, if there is no too much movement, if you can have a very positive result. Notice that when I move away from the camera, it will reduce this blur effect, and when I move closer, it will intensify to give a very natural result. Now notice that it also has a good stabilization when you are walking. And in this case with the objects, something strange happens because you notice that there are moments where they stay in focus better than others. But in general, we could say that it is a portrait recording mode that is positive. Since most cell phones do not allow recording with this mode in 4K, however this device does, although it is more recommended for scenes of little action in order to see a natural result. And just as a curious fact, in this mode it also allows you to zoom to have a telephoto perspective. However, it is completely digital zoom, so it is not so attractive. As for fast camera, this device gives us a curious experience that I had not seen in others. For starters, with the main camera if it is stabilized. But I say that with the main camera because in this case if you let us change camera, something I had not seen in other phones. But if you use the cameras, telephoto cameras for example, you will notice that there is no stabilization in the fast camera. So the result can be a little bad with these cameras, but with the main camera, the result is positive, with good speed adjustment and good stabilization. Although it seems to me that it is a fast camera, a little more focused on people, since for landscapes the speed can get to fall slightly short. In this case I think it was a high enough speed so that if you notice a positive result. But there are other cell phones that let you get up to 1800, 800x or more, while this only reaches 60x, so the fast camera will not be as spectacular as others. And as for slow motion, note that you can record in 4K at 120 frames per second, something that is certainly very good and very attractive because you have a very good level of detail and this slow scene looks very good. Very few devices today has the ability to record in the same quality, so it is something that you have to get to highlight it a lot. You can also go up to 240 frames per second to gain more slowness, but in this case the resolution drops to full HD, which is still something good, but if you notice a considerable loss in the level of detail, so I would recommend much more to record the slow motion scenes in 4K at 120 frames per second. Also, you have to know that Samsung is still not bringing back the super slow motion mode that it removed from Galaxy S25 Ultra. I find it surprising that Samsung has removed that mode when it was one of its strengths, but you can no longer record in a 960 frames per second mode. Regarding the front camera, note that this will be the result recording at 60 frames per second. In this case converted from HDR to SDR, so you can play it on other monitors. But the quality is supreme with this mode activated on a compatible monitor. Now look at the result with 30 frames per second. I think the color is very good. The contrast is also positive. Here, the only thing I could criticize would be the fact that you have to move your arm away a lot to look good. Framed. In backlight, we're going to see a good enough performance, although the shadow area is left with a little more noise than I would like. So I don't consider it to have a spectacular dynamic range, but it does perform well. Notice how when I go into the shadows, the illuminated area becomes slightly overexposed. But overall, the video recording quality with the front-facing camera is very good in these well-lit scenarios. As I say, even in environments with too much backlight, it will still manage to balance enough, although the illuminated area gets to overexpose a little more than necessary. I think you can see it in these test changes I make in highlights and shadows. But another positive thing about this camera is that it has autofocus. So you can actually get objects quite close, and if it's able to focus on them, then in good light conditions, I insist at the result. I found it to be completely positive. It is a very good camera. However, in indoor scenes, we will begin to notice that it is a camera that has not seen too much evolution. While in the day or outdoors we saw a very good quality, indoors the colors look a little distorted, appears a little more noise, and in this case it is still not a scene so dark. And I think that for the price range, if we could ask for a better quality camera. In fact, we are going to confirm this at night, where you will notice that there is much more noise and graininess and certain vibrations are present that are quite uncomfortable. Although this has a little to do with the stabilization. But the reality of things is that it's a poor quality video compared to the price of this device. While in the day we saw that it was spectacular, the level of detail it achieves, really at night it suffers too much. Even the color does not look too accurate, there is too much noise and very little level of detail. So for this camera to take good advantage if you need a very good lighting, otherwise the result could disappoint, and I think this is one of its weakest points. The front camera to record video I did not like in human light scenarios, little complicated. With the front camera you can also record in full HD slow motion at 120 frames per second. A simple slow motion, but if you need it at some point there it is available. Obviously, you are also going to be able to record with the fast camera mode, and it comes with stabilization and it works well with different speed settings, so I like the fast camera. You also have available the portrait recording mode on this front camera. With a good quality, the truth seems to me a good detection of the foreground and background to apply a blur, and the positive thing is that it can be in K and also with HDR, so the recording, the truth is that it is quite complex and of very good quality. If you have an object nearby, it can focus as long as it intelligently lets you know that it is the foreground. For example, in this case, observe how when I grab this log, if it focuses. But if I let go, it will be out of focus. So everything will be through artificial intelligence and not some special sensor. Then there may be some scenarios where the foreground is not very well detected. But in general, we could say that it does a very good job. Mainly because of the resolution issue, few devices support recording at this level of detail with this blur effect. And finally, note that it also supports dual recording mode and this in K. In fact, Samsung is the only one I know that can record in this resolution with this mode. However, it is not perfect. Something I like is that the picture-in-picture mode frame can be moved wherever you want and has rounded corners. That gives it a much more elegant touch. Professional, however, you can't resize this box, although you can rotate between one camera and the other to give more prominence to the front camera or the rear camera. However, you can't zoom, although you do have autofocus enabled, but definitely the fact that it doesn't allow you to zoom has you a little more limited. In order to use another camera, you have to stop the recording and start it again. In this case, for example, I am using the main camera. I've used the front camera and the front camera, but again, it's not zoomable. So you have to stop recording and start again if you want to zoom in a little bit using one of the other lenses. For the resolution, it seems to me the best dual mode, but because of the zoom limitation, it falls a lot in my ranking. So everything has pros and cons, and here I simply tell you what I like and don't like. You let me know your opinion in the comments. Let's go to the software section where Samsung is a specialist. In this case comes with Android 15 and One UI 7, the new version of Samsung's customization layer. So we will find the latest, and also with the promise of 7 years of software updates, 7 years of security patches. So it will be a device that will definitely have a long time to live. Let me tell you with speed some of the highlights of this device. With regard to customization, note that there is a complete store called Galaxy Themes, where you have a fairly complete catalog of different customization options with backgrounds. Icons and even covers for always on display, so you can customize a fairly intense way your phone. Personally, I do not like to use any of this, but there is available, although several themes are paid, evidently also having this. Part your configuration center for the wallpaper. Screen, and to configure also the lock screen. Note that we will find some variations of this animated background that is the default. But you can also access another section to set your own wallpapers, and in this case to configure any photograph. Note that if you choose the frame option, even have some level of depth scan so that you can create this type of customization on your device if you wanted it personally. I would like that this depth detection could also be used to overlap or be below the clock to have a much more advanced customization, but this is more or less the level of customization that you could achieve with this device. Obviously, you can also change the background color, and automatically it will also be synchronized with the color of the clock. We could also completely remove the background of the image. Then it seems to me that yes, you could get a good level of customization in this device. Notes that also has the option to suggest that through an intelligent analysis will give you several default settings for you through a gallery. Choose the one you like or manually. You can go configuring all this. You can also set a clock with different fonts. Note there is a very good variety. You can change the size, and we will also be able to change, in this case, the widgets that we have available or quick shortcuts in this section. And we are also going to have the customization of the corner shortcuts, so you can change it to the shortcut that you want. So as you realize, there are many options for you to add in this case to your lock screen, and therefore I think it does have a very good level notes that you could even put a small image. So the level of customization on the lock screen, yes, I think considerably good there. And I just set up the image that I want to appear in this little widget, then that's the lock screen. And obviously on the home screen, you're also going to have the ability to add some widgets quickly. You can also change the size of the icons. And in this generation, you can already disable the labels, i.e. the names of applications, or also to put and remove in widgets, and you can customize the grid and many other. Really, customization is one of the strengths of Samsung, and if you combine it with good luck, you can access Theme Park Home app and other modules that will allow you to customize your phone in an extreme way. But I'll tell you about that in another video that I leave in the description. And as you may have already noticed, it has always on display in full screen, so you can keep an image at all times. This obviously you can enable or disable it and also configure its behavior, since by default it is set to only show it when you touch the screen, or you can have an automatic setting, or you can schedule it on a schedule, or only when you receive a new notification. In short, Samsung shows you many options for you to configure the best possible always on display section, which as you can see not only shows you the clock, but also the wallpaper, your widgets, direct access to the ship that we will see in a moment, and more things. You could also select to erase the background so that only an area of the highlighted image remains, and that's it. Or of course you can access the always on display covers, which as I said are available in the theme section. But it seems to me that it is something that looks a little more old-fashioned. Although if you need or want it, is also available in this format. But let's talk about the Now bar, which as you will notice is at the bottom, both on the always on display and on the lock screen. This is a bar that will show you information in real time. In this case, not having any activity on in real time, I only have direct access to the Now brief, which is another of the features that this device received as a novelty, which will simply give us a summary, in this case noon, but can also give you a summary in the morning or a summary in the evening, and here it's going to show you relevant information that you need to know throughout the day. Obviously, the more you use your device and the more you have things in the calendar, reminders, or use other applications, it will give you more suggestions in this section. But this Now bar will not only show you direct access to the Now brief, but it could also give you, for example, real-time statistics of your sports. In this case, for example, yesterday, Cruz Azul was playing, so it did show me in real time. The score is something that I personally find attractive and useful to keep abreast of any sporting event in real time. It could also give you information from Google Maps to get to your work or a quick shortcut. Also information from Samsung Health, access to the interpreter in case it detects that you are traveling in another country. Also connects with the watch, so that, for example, when you have a timer, you can notice that it also appears in this section without needing to have the whole device active, so I personally like that one. You can also take control of the voice recording if you are recording in Samsung Notes as well, and if an emergency happens as well. And it has to be said that not only is the lock screen a capsule, but if you have the device unlocked, you will have a capsule on the top that you can access quickly with a touch to show the rest of the controls. So I think it's a good option. Also in that capsule, for example, you can see the score of your favorite game. As I said, I think what would be missing in this Now bar would be compatibility with music players that in this case do not appear. Then note that in this case I am playing music but nothing appears in the Now bar. However, in the list of quick controls, if we have access to this player, however, curiously on the lock screen, if the player appears, so you can, from this section, quickly configure your songs and you can tap to display the cover and see some other things. In this case, I'm using YouTube Music, but it will be the same with any other player. For example, now I'm in Spotify and see how you can perfectly access these player controls. Personally, I would like that when playing music also appear the capsule here, so that with a single touch you can change the song and so on. In this case you need to slide and you already have access to the controls, but it interrupts everything you were seeing on screen. By the way, I don't know if you had already noticed, but we have a new quick settings control panel. As you can see, it is now divided into 2 pages. Previously it was all distributed differently, so now you can also edit and change the order even of these controls if you want to move down the Wi-Fi controls or have them stay at the top. You could also change the position of the player to have it closer to your hand, and you can also edit the whole list of controls that appear here. By default, these appear, but you can even add external applications like GPT Chat can add their own shortcut here, so you have lots and lots of controls. Here you will also notice that there is the brightness and sound control in a horizontal format. Plus, you can tap on this to quickly change or activate the dark mode, for example. And of course, if you press and hold, you can also access additional settings, but in this case, some controls send you directly to the settings screen, while other controls send you directly to the settings screen, while other controls send you directly to the settings screen. From this section, show you some options. Note, for example, that in the flashlight, if you could change the intensity directly from this panel, but in secure Wi-Fi, for example, would send you to the full settings. Note that in the settings, you can also press this button if you prefer the option of all together as it was previously. Then in this way would not be separated into two bars, but at the same bar would show both notifications and controls. And if we slide towards below would appear the rest of the controls that we were already seeing. So you have that option also to go back to the traditional settings. And if you use the traditional settings, you could also select whether or not you want the brightness control to appear and how you want the media control buttons to appear. As you notice that this section also comes up to access Smart View and duplicate your screen or select nearby devices to connect with more ease. Of course, before you have to enable all the permissions, which bothers me a little bit, but for example, in this case, it quickly detects that I have a Galaxy Tab S nearby, so if I want to connect it, you can just drag the circle, and this way we will start, for example, a multi-control. So it's an easy way to discover new interactions with the rest of your devices. From this section, we can also access all the SmartThings controls if you turn it on. Also, if you install Google Home, you could have access from this section. In this case, as I had not opened SmartThings, first I must configure and give necessary permissions, and then it will give me access to my home controls directly from this section. Notice how it appears my washer, my dryer, and some other screens. Then with a single button, you can have access also to control the home devices. Remember that in this case, the device includes a pop-up notification style that is Samsung's own, or you can use the traditional style that gives you buttons as well. Then you choose the option. Plus you can customize to have the edge light up in some way and show you different animations. Also in this section, you can choose the colors. Or automatically it's going to have a color based on the application that you have. And note that you could even determine the color depending on the keyword to further customize these notifications. And you can select which applications will send notifications of this style and which applications will send traditional notifications. Also, note that the moment you receive a notification, you can swipe down to open this application in a floating window mode, which you can then move along the screen or minimize it if you wish. So we have a considerably high and positive level of interaction. In addition, the edge panels are still present as they have been for several generations, and in this case you can activate different styles so that they are not only shortcuts to new applications and tools, but you can also have direct access to your contacts or to specific tasks of some application, which in this case include, for example, enter directly to record a video or directly take a screenshot and some other things. You can also have some widgets such as a weather forecast, compass, and other little things, even a curious voice distorter that I had not seen before, seen on other Samsung devices, but only present when you're using the microphone. Although note that in this case has been disabled the ability to install new panels to the Galaxy Store as if we saw previously. Although personally I did not use so many tools, but now they are no longer available. In the advanced features section, we are going to find also available the lab section, which would allow you to enable the floating windows for all the apps. That's a very good thing because from the sidebar we could drag an icon to the center to open the app in a floating mode, or we could also drag up or down to split the screen in two. And notice that these floating windows you can resize perfectly well. Notice how the contents also adjust to be able to show you a little more information in a more compact size. And as I tell you, you can open many applications in this floating format, and combined with the applications that are in the split screen, you could achieve something super advanced. Notice also that if we leave, these apps that were floating are going to be minimized in these bubbles, and the apps that were in split screen will stay together in the recent apps list. By the way, the recent apps list is also redesigned with a slightly different format. And if you click on the icon of each application, you could also lock it so that it doesn't close when you press the close all button, or you could also open them in split screen format, floating screen or switch from floating screen to full screen. But something that I find very curious is that they have disabled the button to have transparencies in the floating screens, which seems a little strange to me because it was a function that I personally found useful when you needed to keep the screen in the floating screen, a glimpse of something that was in the back of the app, but now they don't have transparencies. Within the experimental features, notice that there will also appear an option of responses suggested by artificial intelligence in chat applications, although in this case it does not say which applications it is compatible with. But notice how in this case, it shows me this suggestion of messages when someone has greeted me and in theory is intelligent enough. For example, in this case, they are asking me if I prefer the blue color or the red color, and it has suggested that the blue color seems better to me. I would have liked it to suggest also the red color seems better to me so that with one touch, you can quickly answer messages. Then it will depend a little on the level of intelligence of the device. But it seems to me an easy and convenient option to answer messages with one touch. Now watch. I received a message asking if I have availability for tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. And in this case, it does suggest two answers where I say I can't because I'm busy. One answer where it says I can. So in this case, if it was smart enough, and it's a feature that I really find useful. In this case, I'm trying it with WhatsApp, and if it works now, I'm trying to test it in Telegram, and in this case, I do not see any suggestion. But well, I think WhatsApp, which is the most popular messaging application in many countries, is available and remembers that at the moment it is in the lab section, so they are testing it, but probably in future generations, we will see it as part of Galaxy compatible with many more applications. Another option is to enable and force applications in dark mode, although only available for YouTube, and personally I do not like it enabled, but it comes on by default. In this section, we will also find the configuration of the S Pen, which I remind you that it no longer has Bluetooth. Then in this, if you go to the camera and try to take a picture by pressing the button on the S Pen, you will see that it has no response because the S Pen no longer has Bluetooth. It is something that is very annoying, but it seems that Samsung wants to give priority to you take pictures from your watch or with your ring. But definitely that it bothers a lot that this pen sees a setback from the last generation. What is still available is to interact with the screen without touching it. For example, in the gallery, you can put the stylus on top of some photo and notice that it is going to have a bigger size, and in fact, you can still press some of the buttons that appear suggested to you. If you open a web page in the desktop format, notice that the S Pen can control the cursor, and if you open some drop-down menus, it can also react so that without touching the page screen, you can change the cursor between different menus, so it is still a useful tool. You could also take advantage of the button that has the S Pen to hold it down and select as if it were a mouse on the computer to select several images at the same time, which also happens to be another attractive and useful thing. Same action you could do to select some text that is available on the screen and be able to extract it, so is also an interesting option. In this case, it includes this air command, where you have some options that you can customize if you want to add options, or also if you want to have a more compact view that only shows the shortcuts. In this case, as I tell you, you can configure which shortcuts you want to be available. Here will appear not only those related to the S Pen, but also some shortcuts to applications that you want. Notice that with the S Pen, we could also have the option to translate or magnify the content, which would be another demonstration of how we can interact with the device without the need to touch the screen. Then notice how in this case we could increase to 300 and that it serves as a magnifying glass to see more details directly from whatever is on the screen. And with the option to translate, note that it is also enough to hold the stylus on top of some text and in the form. Immediately it's going to show us the translation here. It can be a simple word-for-word translation, or you can change it to a translation where it considers a slightly larger paragraph. So that's also another way to use and take advantage of this S Pen. You can also set up some default action when you remove the S Pen from the device, and you can take notes with the screen off. That is, if you have the device locked and you quickly remove the S Pen. It interprets that you're going to take a quick note so you can immediately start making some annotation, and in case you have the device locked with the S Pen out of the screen, just bring it closer and press the button to immediately activate this quick capture. Also note that you can pin any note that you have put on your lock screen with this always on display cover. So if you have a very important note and you have the device locked, it will always show you that note. Something that can prove very useful for the forgetful. The device still detects if you have left your S Pen out of the cell phone and start moving to alert you and prevent you from losing it. So the missing Bluetooth option has taken away the ability to use it as a photo shutter or as a remote control for your PowerPoint presentations or something similar. I have to be honest, and I personally didn't use either of those two functions, but there are many people who did. This device also allows us to configure the side button for an action you want by double pressing this button. In fact, you could directly open some app you want, and with the long press by default, it will open Gemini, which we already know as the Google Assistant, but you can also choose it to be Bixby or just a shutdown menu if you are not interested in any of those functions. This device also gives you some other movements and gestures that you can use. For example, simply lift the cell phone to activate the screen, or also double tap the screen to activate it, or double tap it to turn it off, and it still retains the gesture of sliding your hand across the screen to take a capture. Personally, I would like more the 3-finger gesture that other devices integrate, but Samsung keeps it this way. And since we are talking about screenshots, you should know that Samsung has a new option, so that from this sidebar you have this selection by artificial intelligence, and see how, for example, immediately detects the image I want to capture and makes the crop, and from this section I can select the drawing assistant option so that, for example, transforms this image into some other. I could also simply select this part and touch the translate button. So directly whatever content is on the screen, it will translate it, or I could also simply pin it so that even if I exit this application, I can still see this content, in this case the content that is already translated, and I can extract the text in digital format to copy it and paste it somewhere else. So as you can see, these are functions that are quite advanced, and you can practically do the same if you make a traditional capture and press this button to intelligently make that analysis. Just to quickly circle what you want to scan. This device also has a one-handed use mode that is easily activated and allows you to orient towards the left or right hand, even resize the small screen or reposition it. If you want it to be slightly higher or lower, so it's a pretty advanced mode that of course gives you much more comfort when using your device with one hand. Note that it also has very good options for setting up screenshots and recordings, and would even allow you to delete screenshots after you hit the share button so that you don't have too many screenshots piling up in your storage. And video calling apps like Google Meet, Instagram, Teams, WhatsApp, or Zoom, we have video effects available. In fact, they also appear for YouTube when you do live broadcasts. So notice that, for example, they will allow you during a call to enter this control section and the video effects section. In this section, you're going to be able to change the background of your, for example, you can have a blurred background and you can adjust the intensity of this blur if you want to keep a little bit more privacy, or you can have a solid color fill. Again, you can specifically choose the color, or you can even upload an image directly from your gallery to make it look like you are somewhere else. And as I say, it will seamlessly do this. A facial retouching option is also available directly from this part with a single slider, but it helps you to remove a little bit of imperfections. You also have the color tone option if you want to set the camera to look a little warmer or cooler, even in more or less light. So you have quite a few controls available to you when using the camera in video calls. You're even going to have the automatic framing feature that's going to zoom in a little bit so that you can always stay in the frame. So if I move to one side or the other side without the need for me to move the cell phone, this device will always be in frame. Will keep me in the center of this scene. And finally, it also debuts reactions, which is something that previously was not available, to have additional animations when you are on the call, and watch how it will also send them. No matter what application you are using, it will be able to show all these effects. And note that they are even activated intelligently, although Samsung has not shared the list of available gestures that it detects. But watch, more or less it would be these then. There we have these options available for video calls. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but you can also change the microphone mode if you want it to be standard or to highlight the voice and cancel out the extra noise, or to be full spectrum, that is to send the audio as faithful as possible. So you have all those options for these calls as well. Samsung has also changed the name of its AR emoji, and now it is called Galaxy Avatar, where you can create your own character. Note that in this case, you can choose one of those that I saw predetermined, or you can simply take a picture and then the device will try to make an analysis based on your age. It takes very little time to create this character, and it gives you this suggestion that you will later be able to edit. You can edit anything you want. In fact, there are many options to edit your character little by little, from moles to freckles and additional accessories. So really, there are too many parameters to configure your own character, and you can also configure his clothes, although personally I find too feminine several movements he makes, so I do not find it so attractive, but there it is. For now you can use it in the camera and other things, but it is expected that this same character you can use it soon in new Samsung augmented reality products, such as their next glasses. But for now, for example, you could use it within. From the keyboard to have some stickers, although these stickers are sent as an image, which I find strange, at least in WhatsApp. In fact, also in Telegram, they are sent like this with a white box. So they are not so advanced stickers, but they are created based on your own character. In this section, you can configure each of these stickers or create new stickers and animations with lots and lots of customization options. You can even select different backgrounds. You can also select elements, additional things that you can put here. And you can also select movements in your character if you wanted to express its emotions or do actions like dancing and things like that. So as I say, there are many options to create these stickers. In fact, you can also create videos for calls. For example, you can create characters of your friends and assign them so that when they are calling, you can be shown in this way the animation. For example, here we have this video and you can select if you want to use it as a call background, although in this case it is applied as a general background to any call. And remember that in the gallery you can hold down on some object or person to extract it. You can even leave this application and go to another one without releasing to send it or attach it somewhere else. Then this interaction is interesting. You can do exactly the same on some text, because if it will recognize them intelligently to extract them, and from the gallery will also allow you to create a collage or some other things like a small video slideshow. And by default, you can also create some stories to collect your best moments in the photos. And you have direct access to Studio, which is a small simple editor where you can add both photos and videos to do a little editing. It must be said that it is not such an advanced editor, but it is available directly on this device. I see it useful for basic editing, as it allows you to add a little text, some stickers and music, but for more complex edits if you require some other application. And I remind you that Good Lock is also available with a tremendous amount of modules, so you can configure your phone in a much more advanced way. Even so, you can customize more precisely the routines, which is the last section that I'll tell you here, because through these routines you will be able to automate everything on your phone. There are modes that come preset, so that with a single touch you can configure them. Or you can add routines step by step with causes and consequences. The causes that trigger the routines can be a tremendous variety of options, from your location to the connection status of your phone, or if you are using dark mode. If you open an application, or even if you unlock with a specific fingerprint. The truth is that more and more options are being added, and you have many consequences available to automate everything you want on your cell phone. Anything you consider that you do repetitively on your phone could be a good candidate for you to automate in this section of modes and routines, so I love it. And of course, remember that you have Samsung members, where Samsung also gives you some benefits for having a Galaxy, so it's going to give you some promotions. In collaboration with other stores and companies, not just technology, but even clothing, vacation, travel, and other things. So here it is important that you explore so you can enjoy various benefits. Plus you have a forum where you can share with the community your problems or your pictures and more things. Regarding artificial intelligence, I have already made a video explaining each of the Galaxy functions. Let me just highlight some of the new features. That another little thing that I had not told you, what I like most is that in this generation, the device has gained new options that are processed directly on the device. Unlike the last generation where they were few and most depended on the internet connection, something that I find very useful is the ability to translate and summarize PDF documents. So note that simply with this option, you could also generate the summary of the entire document. So for studying, for example, it might help you. And remember that you can get detailed summaries or standard summaries. So I insist that for studying, it could be quite useful. Another new feature is in the Samsung web browser, where you can also click to have it now read you the highlights of this news item. So now through voice can get to give you a summary of what it says any article you want to read. But one of the new features that I found most interesting is inside the Samsung keyboard. So note that when entering emojis, we will also find the Galaxy AI Star, which will allow us to create our own text-based stickers. So, for example, when adding, you choose one of the categories and write what you want it to have. For example, a soccer ball with a face laughing with tears. And note that when you press generate, just wait a few seconds and we will have our sticker ready. And best of all is that in this case, if it will be sent as a sticker with transparency. Unlike the supposed emojis that are generated with your character that are sent as an image. So I think Samsung should correct this because the ones generated by artificial intelligence are sent correctly. And remember that inside the gallery you can edit the audio of the videos. In this generation, as a novelty, everything is processed directly on the device. So, for example, in this case it suggests me the draft audio because it's listened to the original audio.
Okay. Estamos grabando aquí video a contraluz con la cámara ultra wide de este Galaxy S25 Ultra. Vamos a ver qué tal ha mejorado su cámara. Tenemos ahí la zona iluminada y aquí yo estoy parado en la sombra. Voy a acercarme un poco también para ver si esta diferencia se intensifica.
Notice how you hear a background noise, and since I don't have any microphone, the audio is really bad. So you can press this button to delete the audio, and notice that now it gives me several options. For example, I can enhance the voice, and in this case it has also detected that there are wind sounds. Notice that in yellow there are those moments where the wind was more audible, so I can lower the volume of the wind and also of additional noises. And watch after you've processed the audio this way, how it's going to sound.
Estamos grabando aquí video a contraluz con la cámara ultra wide de este Galaxy S25 Ultra. Vamos a ver qué tal ha mejorado su cámara. Tenemos ahí la zona iluminada y aquí yo estoy parado en la sombra. Voy a acercarme un poco también para ver si esta diferencia se intensifica.
So this is definitely one of my favorite features, to edit the audio of your videos with a lot of ease. As I had already anticipated you, this generation incorporates Gemini as the default voice assistant, and now it has the particularity that it integrates well with Samsung apps. Personally, I usually use Bixby as my voice assistant, as I like how it integrates with the clock app to set alarms, timers, or reminders. So let's test those specific actions that have to do with the Samsung system. Set a 5-min timer and let's see what it does in this case. Watch. First, you reported to me that you can already use the system tools, and you notice that it did work and it's already running the countdown. It's something that works well and connects with the Samsung clock app. Let's try it with other things configured. An alarm today at 2:00 p.m. and that's it. In this case it did work. Then also the alarm is working. Let's now test the reminders. Remind me today at 3 p.m. Go to lunch. And let's wait those seconds. There, it connected with the Samsung Reminders application and ready, it could be added. Although in this case it knows that at the same time it has told me that I need to activate some permissions. Then let's add it, activate the permissions, and that's it. This, I guess, is just the first time. In fact, it didn't even add the reminder. So let's try it again because maybe the first time it didn't work. Remind me today at 3:00 p.m. Go to lunch. Let's see if this time it does work, and it looks like it has been added. Let's see if for reminders it works. Even note that it has the ability to understand a little more sophisticated reminders. For example, remind me every day at 8 p.m. Go to sleep. And just like that, you can add these kinds of reminders. There it is. It's been added with this repeat option. I've seen complaints online where it doesn't work with some more specific reminders. Let's try it. Remind me to drink water every hour. And let's see, there it is. How often do you want me to remind you? It says every 1 hour, and let's see, watch, it didn't work there. It says every hour. It gets a little confused on those types of actions. Let's try it now with Bixby. Remember to drink water every hour. And let's see if it gets it. There it is. Watch. In this case, it's already left. It even tells me every hour, and that's it. So Bixby is still smarter about connecting to Samsung services, but at least Gemini has improved. However, Bixby also has other capabilities that we don't yet see in Gemini, for example. If you're inside an app and the keyboard is open, you can press and hold to dictate. This is a quick dictation test, and note that you release and that's it. Although you can do the same by activating the microphone that is at the bottom. I am dictating a slightly longer message. Then that tool you can still get to replace it with the software button. But note how Gemini also allows you to interact and ask questions about the video. For example, let's tell him when there is the price of the cell phone that count in this video. And let's see. In this case, it connects with YouTube, and there it is. According to the video, it gives us the information that is mentioned. Then I think Gemini has very attractive capabilities. You could even activate the conversation mode to chat, as if you had called a friend hello.
Hola, según el video, el Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra cuesta $32,999. Pero si lo compras antes del 20 de febrero, puedes obtener la versión de 512 GB por el mismo precio.
Una duda.
Además,
in the video, do they mention any differences from the Galaxy S24 Ultra?
claro, en el video comparan el Galaxy S25 Ultra con el modelo anterior, el S24 Ultra. Algunas diferencias claves son el peso, ahora es más ligero, y el diseño, tiene esquinas más redondeadas. También mencionan...
Notice it is very interesting to see the capabilities of Gemini. Although Gemini is available on any Android, the novelty of Gemini on this device is that it gains integrated functions with the applications. Samsung's new assistant, so you don't need Bixby as much when interacting with the device. Turn on the flashlight and notice that it also has some other capabilities to control other sections of the device. Set the on-screen timeout to 10 minutes. But notes that in this case did not understand what I wanted. There are pointings that currently only Bixby can configure of your device, so Bixby has not yet lost the battle against Gemini. You could even have voice activation for Bixby and Gemini button activated if you wanted to have both assistants at the same time. In fact, Bixby has also gained a bit more intelligence in this generation. Tell me what you can do. Notice here you can see the list of all the abilities that Bixby has integrated even with the camera and with the whole Galaxy ecosystem. Like adding things to the shopping list or managing your refrigerator. It even connects also with some other apps like Google Maps or Gmail. I find it very curious that Samsung integrates the two voice assistants, both with good capabilities but does not end up deciding on one. Because the last generation Bixby was the protagonist, this generation Gemini is the protagonist. And notice that another new feature of this device is the intelligent search. Notice that in the browser you get filters of people, so you can browse the pictures of different people. Specifically, it gives you categories of documents or some other categories as well. But the most interesting thing is the voice or text search. We're gonna say the following one hand, so it's going to look for all the photographs that have a hand in there. Although in this case it didn't work well, we're gonna try another one. Photographs at night we're going to see. For some reason he started playing the video. I don't know why. It seems to be buggy. I can't believe it how buggy this is. Show me pictures under a tree, and it looks like it will work this time. Let's see, there it is. Observe that it shows me the pictures where I appear under a tree, so here are some other filters as well. Let's try again. I'll give it another try. Show me pictures of a hand and let's see. I think that's the key. No, it didn't work here either. It seems that this still needs to be perfected because I guess it doesn't work as expected. Let's go now to talk about security. This device has an ultrasonic fingerprint reader. This means that it is not necessary to emit light like other devices to recognize your fingerprint. Plus, the recognition is quite fast. Note that just put and remove your finger. Very similar to what we see with capacitive readers. It is very good, although the bad news is that it only allows 4 records, when most cell phones allow 5 records. So you are a little more limited. If you like to register several fingers or people you trust, you have less possibilities. You can also have facial recognition, but even the device itself tells you that it is not such an advanced facial recognition. So it will not offer you such a high level of security, but note that it does register from different angles of the face and even detects whether you have glasses or not to be as safe as possible. But I insist, it is not in 3 dimensions, so you should not trust it too much on it. If your priority is security, the ideal is to only use fingerprint reader. As additional tools, Samsung adds several options. For example, we have secure Wi-Fi that will give us a private VPN. This is very useful when you are connected to public Wi-Fi networks to prevent someone from intercepting your data or something similar. For free, it gives you 1 gigabyte per month, but you can subscribe if you want to have unlimited protection. In this case, a month will cost you 40 pesos. 24H 20 pesos, i.e. $1 or $2, so it's really not too expensive compared to other VPNs. This device also incorporates a new option that when the device is locked, if someone connects it via USB, it will only transfer power. But it will not transfer any other type of data, which prevents any type of attack, although in this case, it only works if the device has been locked for more than 1 hour. We will also find the secure folder option, which notes that it allows us to have a safeguarded center. To access this secure folder can be through your fingerprint or your lock pattern, and here you have completely separate applications. So it could also help you separate a little bit work from personal life, and of course you can also add images, files, anything that you want to have locked here, and you can add applications that you already have installed or you can install new applications. In fact, you could also customize the secure folder to rename it and change the icon, and it will automatically lock when you lock your phone, or you can lock it immediately to exit. We will find an enhanced data protection option that will make the encryption much stronger for your backup data in the cloud or data that is synchronized. And we will also find the Samsung Pass tool that allows you to automatically fill in your passwords to different websites or your card information, addresses or private notes, all from your keyboard. So note that in this case, I can open the rest of the keyboard options and then add the Samsung Pass service to have it always available from the keyboard. Obviously check for your fingerprint, and here you have all your passwords, or you're also going to find additional information that you want to have saved to insert quickly, but you want to have is not visible to everyone. So as I say, for your fingerprint, you will have this additional security tool that certainly gives you a lot of practicality, although of course you can use managers of some other developer, including Google. You also have an option to store things related to blockchain and cryptography, much more advanced things that are already configured in the cell phone as well. We will also find the automatic blocker that with a single switch will prevent several actions. So if you are not such an advanced user, it is recommended that you leave this option on. In fact, it comes on by default. But if you are one of the playful ones who wants to move more things on your cell phone, you probably need to disable this option before doing some other things. This device comes protected with Samsung Knox technology, so we are going to find a level of protection. The Samsung web browser is a fairly advanced hardware level that will prevent attacks, and note that in addition to having a dashboard of what applications are using your camera, your microphone or access to your location so you have much greater clarity regarding your privacy, also integrates this technology that will prevent us from internet tracking. So if you do not want personalized ads and this kind of thing, you can use the Samsung web browser to prevent tracking, and we will also find the maintenance mode. You can also use Samsung's app lock to block all content on this device temporarily while you have the phone repaired. Also note that it comes with a partnership with McAfee to analyze the device against any type of malware, in addition to the analysis made by default Google Play Protect. We'll also find the option to clone some applications to use 2 accounts on the same phone, and you can even send a separate contact list. And of course, we also have Samsung Kids available, which is useful when you have to lend this phone to a little one. Once you enter this mode, there is no way out unless you verify by fingerprint. By default, Samsung suggests the installation of some applications, but parents can authorize to remove some of these applications or add other applications that you already have installed so that they are available and children can use it. A first page of suggestions also appears that has content filtered by Samsung so they can explore new things. But of course, through the settings, you can also remove this option, as well as set some other things like screen timeouts, schedule to go to sleep, contacts that are authorized, or even images or videos that they will be able to access. So it is a good way to maintain a good level of security when you lend the cell phone to a little one. If you happen to lose your phone, Samsung also incorporates its own tracker. And note that in protections against theft, we will also find the new Android options. But we will also find these Samsung options that allow us to search offline as long as there is a Galaxy device nearby. And you can also select the option to send the last location when the device has low battery. So you have two ways to try to find your cell phone in case of a lost Samsung's tracker or Google's. And also within the digital wellness and parental control options, we see everything customized with Samsung so you can see how much time you consume in each application, for example. In this case also shows you categories to see that in social networks you spend enough time, and you can even set target time limits for a general use of the cell phone or for a specific use of each application. It also has tools to help you when you are driving or walking, so you can see what apps are distracting you, plus volume monitor and parental control tools. In conjunction with Google, I would like Samsung to develop their own parental control tools, as I have tried Google's, and honestly, I have not found them very useful. And well, remember that it also integrates all security options developed by Google for Android, although those come integrated into all Android devices. So I leave you in the description a link where you can learn about each of them, in case you still want to have more knowledge about all security options integrated into this device. The battery has a capacity of 5000 mAh, that is the same as the last generation. In theory, the processor is more efficient, although it is also more powerful. So if you demand something very heavy and very demanding, the device will respond in raw power. But if the battery will be consumed faster than the last generation, at least that in the tests I did, since it gave me more or less 20 minutes less than the last generation in a very demanding activity. Although for practical life, normally you will not be with such demanding activities running so long, but definitely that the performance can be affected by so much power. However, in my test that I did in the background, we see a very similar performance to the last generation. It seems to me that the operating system, if well, adapts the consumption of applications that are running in the background so that the battery at the end of the day has a good duration. In fact, with respect to other high-end devices that probably even with batteries that in theory has a larger capacity in this test of, in the background we saw better performance on this 5000 mAh battery than on other devices that have batteries of 800 or more than 6000 mAh. So the figure really shouldn't worry you that much. We see a good optimization, good battery life. As long as you are not running extremely demanding activities, for example, if you start playing very heavy graphic content, the battery can drain very quickly. But as a benefit, it gives you spectacular graphics. However, the battery will drain very quickly in this type of very demanding activities, but for everyday use it will perform well. Remember that you also have the normal saving mode and ultra saving mode. That if you combine it with the routines to make these modes turn on and off automatically, I think you can get to have a remarkably good battery life. In this case, it supports the same load of 45 watts as the last generation, but it is important for you to know that although it supports the same load limit, in this case it does load faster. Especially in the first 30 minutes of charging, which is where Samsung applies a little more power. In the test I did with 15 minutes, it recovered 31%. With 30 minutes, it reached 68%, and the full charge was finished in less than 1 hour. So I think it is a fast charge, and again, do not get carried away only by the number, because there are other manufacturers that can promise 100 watts, 80 watts, or even more. But at the end of the day, there is not an exaggeratedly marked difference, although I must also say that there are others that charge in half an hour. Then I recommend that you see the specific test because it can be very variable. You should not get carried away only by the numbers of watts. In this case, the initial stage is when it applies full power and then maintains a sufficiently high power most of the time, and in the final stage it becomes a little slower. In fact, to take care of the battery, It also has intelligent charging or load lock that you can enable or disable completely to your liking, as it has different levels of battery protection. This so that it does not degrade so fast. You could even tell it to only keep between 100 and 95 the battery. If you want some minimal care, and it's something nice too, although the charger is not included in the box, and that is something to criticize yet, although in Apple and Samsung we are already getting used to. But there are still Chinese manufacturers that if they include the charger, and is a very powerful charger, then it must be mentioned as a disadvantage in this device. And the fact that the charger is not included in the box not only causes you discomfort because you have to buy it by separate, but because then it's a little bit difficult to find a compatible charger or a charger that gives you confidence that it's original. Obviously in the same Samsung store is available as charger. I leave you the link in the description, and in my case I also use Ugreen chargers that have worked well for me. Only compatible with the fast charging of these devices, so I also leave you in the description link to purchase these chargers because they have different styles, prices, sizes and more. Then it could also be a slightly cheaper alternative to buy one of these chargers instead of buying the original charger. But I insist in the description, I'll leave you both links. Regarding the wireless charging, the truth of the matter is that in the beginning it was said that it supported 25 watts charging, and that was something very new. The reality of things is that there is not even 25 watts charging in this Qi standard, so the fastest charging it supports is the one that is available in the Qi standard. The wireless charging rate is 15 watts, although it is convenient to use a case that has a magnetic ring for charging to be as efficient as possible. Because if you just put it on a charging base that does not have a coil too large, it is possible to charge quite slow. But when you use a case with this ring or an official Samsung charger or with a large coil, if you could get to have the 15 watts, however, some cases could cause a malfunction of the S Pen as well. I think you have to be careful with that. So that's one of the reasons why it seems to me that Samsung still doesn't integrate these magnetic absorption magnets directly into the device and forces you to buy a separate case. It's something that hopefully they'll solve in the next gen, because personally I do like the S Pen holder, but it conflicts with these magnetic charging tools. So for example, if you want to use this type of power banks that stick on the back of the device, if you don't have a case, notice that it falls off and doesn't stick. So you require that additional case, unlike the iPhone, where for example it just sticks and that's it, without the need for a special case. So in this sense, the Samsung Thought experience hasn't quite convinced me. Plus, as I tell you, that it's not that fast charging, then hopefully the next generation can improve it. What it still has is the reversible wireless charging that will take advantage of the back of this device to charge, for example, the Galaxy Buds. Although it should be remembered that the Galaxy Watch Ultra, which would be Samsung's latest in terms of its accessories, does not support this charging due to limitations of the watch. The same goes for the Galaxy Watch 7. So this reversible wireless charging from Samsung is losing utility in its ecosystem, plus it's very underpowered. Unlike other devices that in reverse wireless charging can get you 10 or 15 watts. So as you see, in terms of wireless charging, there are many drawbacks still to mention against this device that can clearly be its weak points. Let's now talk about connectivity, where there is also a lot to comment on. For starters, it has support for 5G networks, which is positive. It also has tools through software for you to choose which applications can connect to the internet only with Wi-Fi, and thus avoid unwanted consumption on your mobile data plan. It also supports eSIM, which allows you to add data plans with QR codes instead of having to buy physical SIM cards, and this is especially useful. Wallet will be used when traveling. And in theory, it supports Wi-Fi 7 networks. But I say in theory because I have a Wi-Fi 7 router and it detects it as Wi-Fi 6, and I've had other devices that do detect the Wi-Fi 7 router. So it's another one of these points where Samsung seems to be doing something strange. Of course, Wi-Fi 7 routers are still not that popular, but I would like it to immediately detect it right. It still supports excellent download speeds over both Wi-Fi and mobile data, so it doesn't. Really represents something negative. In the Bluetooth version, we find 5.4. So we are also going to find good stability, and it has NFC to make mobile payments. In this case with Google Wallet by bringing the device close to a bank terminal. It must be said that in this case, Samsung sacrifices its own wallet in favor of Google Wallet, which seems to me something negative because Samsung Wallet is also available in some countries. But in most countries, we'll use the wallet of Google Wallet. Google. Of course, it doesn't have FM radio, but it does have wireless screen projection through Smart View. So you can even project just an application while you're doing anything else on your cell phone. So it's quite advanced projection. It's not just in a mirrored format. And not only can you have this type of projection, but also Samsung DeX, which would allow you to project the screen in a windowed format as if it were a computer. And in this way, you can open several applications, and if you combine it with a keyboard, a mouse, Bluetooth, and the web browser, you could work practically from your cell phone, depending on the level of complexity of the applications you use. But that makes it a much higher level tool. In fact, you can not only do this wirelessly, but also by cable, so you have much greater stability and less latency. So in all this, it complies very well. Of course, it also has Android Auto and the USB-C port 3.2 Gen 1 with a very good data transfer speed. And as for the sensors, it has accelerometer, geomagnetic field sensor, orientation sensor, gyroscope, but the proximity sensor is virtual, it is lousy. There is no way to justify the integration of a sensor of this style in this very expensive device, definitely one of its weak points. It also has a pressure sensor that not all devices use, although it is a little less useful. Let's say it goes more specific for some applications. But as you realize in this block, it has practically everything. Except for Wi-Fi 7, which is a little strange. With respect to the ecosystem, Samsung finds one of its strongest points, not only for the large catalog of devices and accessories that has to connect, for example, the Galaxy Ring, the different types of Galaxy. Watch, the Galaxy Tab and all the interaction between them is very good. They even have their TVs or even their refrigerators where you could project the screen of your cell phone in a weird way, but you can do it. So Samsung has one of its main strengths in this aspect, although I would still complain that Samsung Mexico does not distribute the Galaxy books in this country. So if you want a Samsung laptop, you must import it or buy it somewhere else. Fortunately, Samsung's collaboration with Microsoft is quite close, so it already brings everything installed with respect to linking with your Windows laptop. Even if it is not a Samsung laptop and has good interaction technology such as answering calls from your tablet, taking pictures from your Galaxy Watch, or even with the Galaxy Ring, do this gesture. Possibly that's why they have removed the Bluetooth from the S Pen that now does not allow you to do this kind of actions of taking pictures to favor the sale of their watches or their accessories. But it is definitely something that has annoyed users a lot, the fact of not incorporating Bluetooth in the S Pen. Because before it was already there and they have removed it, so that definitely results as an anger. It has options to share the cell phone camera with the tablet or computer, so I insist that the ecosystem is quite advanced, and as a brand, Samsung is distinguished by being quite strong, although despite the fact that offers alternatives to Google services in other respects, also has a very close collaboration with Google. Samsung is a bit strange. A clear example is Bixby and Gemini that fight to be the assistant of this device. Although this year Gemini is the default assistant, but for example in the gallery we will not find integration with Google Photos, but with OneDrive from Microsoft, and we will also find the Galaxy Store available as a separate app store from Google Play Store. And Samsung SmartThings as the tool to control home devices instead of Google Home. So I think Samsung has good strengths to function as a separate brand from Google, but is aware that Google does a better job in other aspects. So it's not completely separate and still has several agreements. I think it would be nice to see in the gallery available the option to back up your photos to OneDrive or Google Photos for the user to choose from, but since Samsung wants to be friends with everyone. Also, this agreement with Microsoft probably prevents it from integrating Google Photos in the gallery. So the fact that Samsung wants to be friends with everyone is good and bad at the same time, because yes, it has an open collaboration, but those same agreements sometimes create limitations on other things. However, it is clear that Samsung's ecosystem is very good at the level it has currently reached, so there is little to complain about in this aspect. It's time for a performance test, doing this traditional app opening test. This device has the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy processor, a special edition that apparently has greater optimizations. In this case, it comes with 12 GB of physical RAM, so it should give very good performance. This device is the most snappy I have tested to date. It took only 1 and 2.5 seconds on average to open each app. The truth is that it responds very fast. It is impressive, the speed it achieves in conjunction with the optimization of One UI. It seems to be excellent. Let's also see how it works within some applications by scrolling, and we do not see any problems. And note that in this case it seems that Samsung has solved the problem of white screens when switching applications. I love the fluidity that has this device. It is very good, and these 12 GB of RAM are well used, because it knows that we do not see any application reboot when we are switching between each of them. And note that applications that require a lot of graphics processing also responds very well. I have tested these same filters on other devices and they are perceived a little slower. I think the Samsung experience here is really very good, so there's no doubt that performance will be one of its strongest points. It has an exaggeratedly high power that I haven't seen so well optimized in any other Android device. It's incredible. And in addition to the 12 gigabytes of physical RAM, note that in this case, the device offers us another 8 GB of virtual RAM. I would recommend turning this option off, but it comes on by default. Also note that you can add applications to exclude so that they are not constantly being cleaned if you want something to always remain running in the background. And note that in this case you can also see which apps are constantly running in the background. In this case, I find it very curious that CapCut, which is currently an application that is completely closed, is still running in the background. So it's a good tool to see what things might be running in the background. If it's not consuming too much battery or running there in the background, then it's useful. In this case, I'm testing the version with 256 gigabytes of storage. But there's also the 512 gigabyte version and the 1 tera version, which would be the most attractive, obviously. Note that in this case, since I have a lot of heavy games installed that I've been testing, there is a very good amount of space used, so if you like to play very heavy content a lot, it would be best to purchase the of a terabyte, because you have to consider that you don't have the ability to put a micro SD card in it to extend the storage. But since we are talking about storage, let's test how is its speed, and note that in this case, it will reach some high peaks, although curiously it does not reach the highest as if we had seen in some other devices, however. Honestly, it is not such a relevant data. Notice that the write speed is quite high. The average cell phone is in this range of 300 megabits per second, but here we see a very high write speed, although the read speed was slightly short. But we'd better do a real-world test, so let's see how long it takes to export this in 4K. We're talking about several clips recorded in K with HDR on this device that has a total duration of 1 minute after stitching them together, and look, it took 15. Secondly, showing again that it has tremendous muscle, it is an exaggeratedly powerful device. Let's go now to talk about games, and for that, there is the Gaming Hub, where Samsung gives you access to some content to play without having to install them. So, if you are a very casual gamer and do not want to consume your storage, you could play some of all this, but for gamers, of course you can manage in this section all the games you have installed, but before you go to the games, note that in this case you can access Game Booster to select some of the settings. For example, you can select the performance profile you want, whether you want to save battery or give it maximum power, and individually you can also customize what thing you want to give priority to per game. In this case, we did not make any changes to all these settings for our tests. Note that you can also select whether you want to play with 120 Hz or 60 Hz. Which can be useful if you want very long gaming sessions and the battery to last as long as possible. You also have the ability to pause charging when using a power delivery charger, so that the power does not go through the battery, but goes directly to the device, and in this way you do not heat up the battery. You do not degrade the battery, and you can have a continuous gaming experience. You can also select how you want to access the additional tools shortcuts, plus it allows you to rearrange the arrangement of the tools. You can also choose the shortcuts of the applications that will appear to run floating, as we will see in a moment, and you can change the order of each of these applications. You'll also find the option to dim the screen to save battery life when the game is downloading content, and you can select how often to dim the screen to save battery life when the game is downloading content. Time you want it to activate automatically and while that screen is dimmed. You're also going to notice that the screen can reduce the frame rate per second to avoid excessive battery consumption. It also allows you to configure screenshots in both image and video. So let's now open a game so you can see the tools. Notice that in this case a small bar appears that we can slide to show the tools that come optimized with respect to past generations. We found a button to improve the touch response of the screen, another button to dim the screen while you are downloading content, and note that we can even set different levels of brightness or dimming. And also configure how often we want to automatically enable the screen dimming. Of course, we can unlock to continue using, and we can take screenshots or video, and also lock the edge panel. I'm not sure if it will be activated accidentally. We are also going to find the automatic brightness lock, which greatly improves the experience in horizontal games because it is not going to be modified even if you cover the light sensor. And you can also lock Bixby, again as I tell you, to avoid unwanted activations. In addition, you can have a quick look at game optimization and RAM consumption, as well as quickly access some apps in a floating mode to answer some message without having to leave your game. I find it curious that the game plugins are no longer available, which were additional add-ons that Samsung offered. So the ability to see the frame per second count or CPU consumption natively has been removed. Hopefully with some update they will add it, because it seems very strange to me to have removed that option that could be quite attractive for gamers. For starters, I tried Bright Memory, a new game that is extremely heavy, and notes that in this case we set up to 120 frames per second on screen, with all the quality at maximum. Although quality of shadows the most was available was medium. But of course, this is a game that does have ray tracing. So note that in this case we also enabled water reflections and all the options to the maximum. And I must say that it is a spectacular game. The graphics look incredibly good, very detailed, very realistic. It's one of the best games I've tried recently, including its visual effects, explosions and more. And this device was able to run it at 120 frames per second on average. The truth is amazing that it reaches this level, although it must be said that it overheated in this game 45.3 degrees Celsius, but even recording the screen we still see a good performance, although it does not keep the experience so fluid as without recording the screen, but still noting a fairly positive gameplay. So it is a device that gives you a very good gaming experience, but with a heating that could be annoying in some scenarios. I then played Asphalt Unite and note that in this case also the graphics settings were as advanced as possible. It should be noted that in this case I saw settings that I had not seen on other devices. For example, we went up to 120 frames per second and adjusted at the best graphics quality possible, including highlights at the highest, depth of field and shadow resolution also at the highest. So it was a super complex setup, and again the device behaved perfectly. Regarding the stability, 120 frames per second on average. You are going to notice that the game looks spectacular graphically speaking. Although this same content can be run on much simpler cell phones, it must be said that here are graphics. A better experience to the game, but again heating was very important. It's true that we were coming from playing very heavy content, but in this case it got up to 46.1 degrees Celsius. So believe me, the warm-up is going to be very high if you play 120 frames per second. So even though it has enough power, it is recommended to play with simpler settings. Then I played Arena Breakout, and it must be said that in this case also shows us some settings that I had not seen available in other cell phones, for example. Lets us get up to 120 frames per second with Ultra HD settings, although if you want to use ray tracing, it's going to limit you to 60 frames per second. But here the interesting thing is that the ray tracing option appears, which I have not seen available in other cell phones, even though they have processors compatible with ray tracing. So this is the first time I see this setting available. I don't know the reason, but it seems that Samsung is getting an excellent optimization in conjunction with the developers. And again, the experience in this game is quite positive and very realistic. It had 60 frames per second on average, with excellent stability again. And in this case, since it was limited to 60 frames per second, we didn't see such exaggerated warming as we had seen in the other games, which went up to 43 degrees Celsius. I then turned off ray tracing to see how it behaved with 120 frames per second. And again, we see excellent fluidity. In fact, the graphics still look good, but then you will notice that the heating goes up. That's why I conclude that when playing with 120 frames per second is when you will find the highest heating. Because again, it went up to 46.5 degrees Celsius. So heating can really be a problem if you play 120 frames per second. So even though it gives you that possibility, it's recommended that you play at a lower rate. Then I played PUBG. In this case, note that by default it gives the HD graphics at a high rate, but of course you can go beyond that. So you can go up to an extreme rate with HD graphics, or if you go down the graphic quality, you can go up to Ultra Extreme. So in this case, we first gave priority to play with an Ultra HDR quality, and with this setting, the graphics look much more realistic with good effects, but it goes up to 40 frames per second. So you may not perceive ultra fluid movements, but this itself allows you to have a much cooler execution. Note that in this case it went up to 38.6 degrees Celsius, which is much lower than what we had seen in other games, but we also saw that the frame rate per second was much more limited, Then we played with the 120 frames per second, lowering the graphics quality, and notes that the performance again was really very good in terms of stability and fluidity. There is no complaint. And in this game, since it is still not as complex as others we tested, it still maintains a relatively cool performance at 42.7 degrees Celsius. Then we play Henshin Impact and notes that by default gives us the high graphics quality, but we tested it to the limit, turning it up to the highest possible quality, also activating 60 frames per second, which is the maximum available here, and turning up the motion blur. And the performance was practically perfect. In this case, it helps that the 120 frames per second option is not available. Because possibly if it were 120 frames per second, it would have a higher warm-up. But in this case, at 60 frames per second, it runs without any kind of problem. We even see a fairly cool performance. Warming up is no problem at all in this content, so it was a fairly easy thing for this device. It didn't even have a single low peak, and even while we were doing the monitoring, you see through the graph, we started recording the screen about halfway through, and you notice that you don't even notice it, losing performance recording a gameplay. Then we played Warface, and note that we went up to the highest possible quality to 60 frames per second, and at first had a very small low peak, but out of that the stability was very good. Again, 60 frames per second on average, although curiously in this case came to have a slightly higher heating. But here the remarkable thing is that despite having a very noticeable heating in the hands, the device continues to maintain a very good performance despite being hot. This is possibly because it has a new vapor chamber that is 40% larger than last generation. So if you notice that it helps in performance, although in the hand if it is perceived a little uncomfortable all the heating, then we played Call of Duty. In this case, by default, gives the maximum graphics quality at the maximum rate. We can go up to a rate of ultra frames by lowering the graphics quality to a medium level, and note that if you give priority to the graphics quality, if all the visual effects are available, so in graphic compatibility it is very good. First we played giving priority to the graphic quality, and I must say that it looks excellent. Even the visual effects. Know that when you enable the side, you see a special outline, definitely are exaggeratedly good graphics, and in this case maintained a very good experience, 60 frames per second. Then again, as I say, when you play at 60 frames per second, I think the temperature is controlled much better. Since in this case I did not know the 40 degrees Celsius, then the truth has surprised me the improvement, because usually in Galaxy devices gaming was something that did not go well. It was with some low peaks, jerks and excessive heating. In this case the heating still seems to be a small problem, but the rest of things have been greatly improved, and the gaming experience is really very positive by the level of stability it achieves. Then we played giving priority to the refresh rate, reaching 120 frames per second on average, and in this case, as you notice, the graphic quality does not drop to the lowest, so we continue to see still good enough graphics with tremendous fluidity. But again, the temperature rises tremendously when you play 120 frames per second. As the same content on other devices may not pass 40 degrees, but in this case it reached 42.9 degrees Celsius, so the warm-up is going to be noticeable when you play 120. We then played Sendless Sun Zero, and note that we set the graphics quality as high as possible as usual to give it a proper test for its price, and setting it at this time you will notice that again the experience is perfect, 60 frames per second on average with very good graphics. If you notice a little low spike in our graphics, it was because we finished a mission and it loaded a special animation, so actually does not affect the gaming experience. The truth is that also with this game that has interesting graphics and different types of interactions, the experience is completely positive. Then we played SpongeBob SquarePants, and curiously by default it is in low resolution, but to put the test according to its price, we put everything in epic quality at 60 frames per second, and there is not much to comment here. The whole experience was very positive. Just as a comment, it should be noted that this game at times in some specific processors tends to have some complications, but this device is not one of them. Although recording the screen, maybe if you perceive some drop in the frames per second but nothing really serious. Without recording screen you do not have any kind of problem, so you will find an excellent experience, and in this case did not even get too hot, again because it goes to 60 frames per second. Then we played Kark Street, one of the most complicated games, as it also has ray tracing, and note that we set it to the heaviest graphics quality possible. I must remind you that this game is one of the most complicated we have seen on smartphones. We also configured without limit the frame rate per second, and in this case it had an average of 53. But note that there are many more fluctuations, which confirms how complex this game is. The graphics look spectacular, but if you record the screen you will notice even more slowdown, so this game is possibly the toughest test we currently see in the smartphone market. But despite that, if you can still play it smoothly, it would be appropriate to play it at a lower graphics quality. But we wanted to put the most complicated test possible for you to notice how, even without surpassing 60 frames per second, we saw a very important warming that came. The performance of the game is up to 45.2 degrees Celsius, but I insist it is one of the most complicated we have seen. And to finish with all our tests, we played War Thunder, enabling the highest possible graphics quality. This is another game that also has ray tracing, and perhaps we wanted to see if it was able to run it at 120 frames per second, and in this case you will notice that it also has several fluctuations. But the low speed was just 45 and generally always stays above 60 frames per second. So it is not a problem, and you always have a good gaming experience as well, although it is a somewhat slow game in terms of movements. But the graphics are quite advanced and come to heat the device to a remarkably high level, in this case up to 44.2 degrees Celsius, confirming what I've been telling you throughout this block of games, that the performance is spectacular, but with a noticeable heating. Fortunately, the heating does not take its toll on performance, but in the experience in the hand, if you could get to affect you, so it will be appropriate to play with slightly lower rates of frames per second. In conclusion, we are definitely in front of the king of Android, especially for the software. That is the element in which I consider that Samsung is far ahead of its competition, even though in cameras it might not be as strong currently because it does not integrate too many. The software can play a major role in the experience of the device, at least for me, but it's not just modern sensors or something more advanced. The screen is very good, the design is also very good, the sound is very good, the cameras are very good, although I would not say the best. The software I do consider to be the best. The battery, maybe due to the great power that has the processor, is going to be a little short, so maybe you will need to be activating the power saving mode. But the performance is simply brutal. It is a device that has extreme power, although as you saw, for games could get to have excessive heating too. But it seems to me an excellent device, which is very similar to the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which is also an excellent device. But yes, we will find significant improvements in this generation, although at first glance it seems that it is more of the same, as we often complain many times. But of course, if you have the possibility of acquiring the Galaxy S24 Ultra expense at a much lower price, it would be a highly recommended option. However, if you buy the Galaxy S25 Ultra, I do not think you will be disappointed, with the exception of these little things that have been removed that I told you, such as game plugins or super slow motion mode, which anyway was not in the last generation, and especially the Bluetooth on the S Pen, but it will depend on you as a user to value whether these absences are very serious or not. For the moment, we have reached the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If so, you know you can tell us, and see you next time.